Hey there, tonight we're uncovering why being a medieval farmer was less of a rustic idyll and more of a relentless grind. What you're about to discover might surprise you with the sheer resilience needed just to survive. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. You're ankle deep in mud, and the sun's barely peeking over the horizon, yet here you are, gripping a wooden plow with calloused hands that have seen more blisters than a sailor's feet. Welcome to your day job as a medieval farmer, where the concept of a 9 to 5 would sound like a fairy tale. Your life revolves around the back-breaking work of turning the earth, and trust me, it's not just your muscles that are feeling the strain. Your wallet, or the medieval equivalent, is under siege too. Let's talk tools. If you think medieval farming came with a shiny John Deere, let me burst that bubble. You've got a plow, sure, but it's made from wood, and if you're lucky, it's got a bit of iron clinging to it like a penny on a magnet. Your oxen, the medieval equivalent of a tractor, are slow and stubborn, and they are probably more interested in chewing cud than helping you out. It's not just the physical labor that's a killer, it's the time. You're looking at 12 to 14 hours of this every single day, and that's just for starters. Now, you might think, well, at least I'll have a feast waiting for me at the end of the season. Not quite. Enter the local lord and the church, both of whom have a keen interest in your harvest, by which I mean they take a hefty cut. The local lord, that guy in the fancy castle who probably hasn't seen dirt in years, expects you to pay rent or a share of your produce as a form of tax. And let's not forget the church, which has its own little scheme called a tithe, traditionally 10% of your harvest. You're left with the crumbs, and let's be honest, even those are getting stale. Economic pressures are as common as the muck on your boots. You've got land to till and mouths to feed, and every year it's the same gamble with nature. Will it be a good harvest or a famine year? Spoiler alert, you don't have much control over it. The Black Death, that charming 14th century visitor, wiped out up to 60% of Europe's population, but it didn't quite kill off the lords and churches' appetites. They still want their dues, plague or no plague. You might have heard romantic tales of the pastoral countryside, with rolling hills and a simple, honest life. Yeah, that's a load of medieval manure. Those picturesque hills are a slog to climb, especially when you're carrying sacks of grain that weigh as much as a small child. And simple doesn't mean easy. It means you're at the mercy of the seasons, with no safety net if things go south. Let's put some numbers into this muddy picture. A medieval peasant's annual income was roughly equivalent to 5 pounds of silver, which sounds like a pirate's treasure, until you realize it's barely enough to cover your living costs. A pound of bread could cost you about a penny, and with an average of 240 pennies in a pound of silver, you're not exactly rolling in dough literally or figuratively. And who are you really working for? Technically, you're a free peasant, but let's face it, you're tied to the land more firmly than a knight to his code of chivalry. The local lord has legal rights over you, and while you're not a serf, one of those poor souls bound to the land by law, your options are still as limited as the tools in your shed. You owe labor services, rent, and of course those taxes and tithes. It's a feudal system, and you're at the bottom of the pyramid, holding up the weight of everyone else's prosperity. Speaking of prosperity, the harvest isn't just about filling your pantry. It's a matter of survival. A bad harvest means less food, higher prices, and more debts. And if you're thinking about taking a day off for a medieval spa day, think again. There are no weekends, just the relentless cycle of sowing, growing, and harvesting. The church, supposedly your moral compass and spiritual refuge, also acts as an economic anchor. Priests and monks might preach about the virtues of poverty, but they're not turning down their share of your hard-earned crops. You're paying them in wheat, barley, or whatever else you can grow, and in return, you get the promise of eternal salvation. Not quite a fair trade, considering the immediate demands of your earthly existence. So, there you have it. Your life as a medieval farmer is a constant juggle of physical labor, economic pressures, and social obligations, all wrapped up in the unpredictable whims of nature. It's a grind, and not the romantic, rustic idyll you might have been sold. As you plow through another day, quite literally, remember that your toil isn't just about feeding your family. It's about keeping the whole feudal machine running. And that, my friend, is why it really sucked to be a medieval farmer. And just when you think you've got a handle on this medieval farming gig, in comes Mother Nature, brandishing a weather report straight out of a Shakespearean tragedy. If you thought your biggest worry was the local lord's tax collector sniffing around, think again. A dark cloud on the horizon could spell catastrophe more efficiently than any marauding band of brigands. Let's talk weather. In an age where the closest thing to a forecast was an old lady's rheumatic knee predicting rain, you were as clueless about tomorrow's weather as a cat is about quantum physics. 1 minute, you're basking in the sun, and the next, a thunderstorm rolls in like a medieval rock concert, complete with lightning pyrotechnics. Without grain silos or modern irrigation, a single storm could wash away your hopes for a bountiful harvest faster than a knight could chug a pint of mead. Now, here's where it gets really ironic. You're the food supplier of the medieval world, yet you're perpetually perched on the edge of starvation. Bad harvest. Get in line for the famine express, because it's coming to a village near you. Even a mild drought could shrink your grain yield to the point where you'd be rationing bread like it's the last loaf on earth. Meanwhile, the local lord is still feasting on roast swan, oblivious or indifferent to your rumbling stomach. To put it into numbers, let's say you're growing wheat, because let's face it, you're probably growing wheat. An average acre could yield around 10 bushels in good weather, but throw in a soggy summer, and you might be looking at just 3 or 4, and that's before you pay your dues to Lord High and Mighty and the ever-present church. Suddenly, your already tight margins are as thin as the crust on a medieval pie. And let's not forget the medieval calendar, which wasn't exactly your best friend. Harvesting was a race against time, with everything needing to be completed before the autumn rains turned your fields into a muddy quagmire. The Feast of St. Michael on September 29 was the deadline looming over you like a grim reaper with a scythe. Miss it, and the elements would turn your hard-earned crops into a soggy mess. But wait, there's more. The seasons weren't the only thing playing havoc with your life. Ever heard of the Little Ice Age? No, it's not a Disney sequel. It's a period starting around the 14th century, when Europe decided to audition for the next Ice Age movie. Colder temperatures and unpredictable weather patterns meant crop failures on a continental scale. Imagine waking up to frost in June. Yeah, that's the kind of curveball the medieval climate threw at you, ensuring that even the most diligent farmer could end up with an empty pantry. In this world, the concept of a rainy day fund was about as real as a unicorn in your stable. You had no savings to fall back on, no insurance policy, and no government bailouts. If nature played foul, you tightened your belt, or more accurately your rope belt, and hoped your neighbors didn't swipe your last turnip. The feudal system, while offering a semblance of protection, also meant you were stuck in a cycle of dependency on the Lord's mercy and the Church's charity, neither of which was particularly known for its generosity. Yet, despite the hardship, there's a certain romance to the idea of working with your hands, tending to the land, and living off what you grow. It's a tale as old as time, woven into the very fabric of human history. But let's not kid ourselves. No amount of pastoral poetry can sugarcoat the harshness of a life dictated by forces beyond your control. It's a testament to the resilience of the medieval farmer, who, despite being at the mercy of the elements, managed to keep the medieval world fed. So, as you stand in your field, scanning the skies for any ominous signs, remember that your job is not just about planting seeds in the ground. It's a high-stakes game of chance, where every decision is a gamble with nature. You're not just a farmer. You're a meteorological detective, a survivalist, and an unwitting player in the grand drama of medieval life. And that, my friend, is just another reason why it really sucked to be a medieval farmer. And as you gaze across your muddy field, contemplating the medieval soap opera that is your life, let's dig deeper into the feudal system's social hierarchy, where you're positioned somewhere between not quite a serf and definitely not a lord. It's a bit like being on the lowest rung of a very long ladder, where the only way is up, but the rungs are greased with the sweat of 1,000 generations. First, let's talk about serfdom. If you were a serf, congratulations. You were essentially the property of the land. Unlike free peasants, serfs couldn't just pack up their plows and move to greener pastures. Nope, They were as stuck as a squirrel in a knight's helmet. The legal and economic chains binding them to their lord's estate were as unbreakable as a medieval chastity belt. Serfs owed their lords not just rent, but a hefty chunk of their labor, too. And don't get me started on the merchant. A charming little fee serfs had to pay if they wanted to marry off their daughters. Nothing says romantic like a marriage tax right. Now you might think, hey, at least I'm not a serf. True, you have a smidge more freedom, a sliver really, but upward mobility, forget about it. The social hierarchy was stiffer than a knight who forgot to oil his armor. Moving from peasant to lord in medieval society was about as likely as a dragon crash landing in your cabbage patch. The lords held the land, the power, and the keys to any kind of social advancement. In fact, they were so entrenched in their status that even the thought of a peasant rising above their station was enough to send them rushing for their smelling salts. So why didn't more peasants revolt? Well, they did. Occasionally. But medieval uprisings were often as successful as a jousting tournament for unhorsed knights. Take the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England, for instance. It was a fiery cocktail of high taxes and social unrest, with peasants marching on London like they were headed for their own medieval Woodstock. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well. The revolt was crushed, and the aftermath only reinforced the existing power structures. It was a stark reminder that while you could shake the ladder, toppling it was a different matter entirely. Let's not forget the social stigma attached to farming. In medieval society, being a farmer was seen as the lowest of the low, a bit like being the medieval equivalent of a telemarketer. The lords and ladies might have feasted on the fruits of your labor, but they wouldn't be caught dead with dirt under their manicured nails. Farming was a dirty, thankless job, and the nobility made sure you knew it. You were the backbone of the economy, sure, but that didn't mean you got a seat at the table, or even a thank you note. Contrast this gritty reality with the way pastoral life is depicted in medieval art and literature. It's all rolling hills, lush meadows, and shepherds serenading their flocks under a sky painted with the colors of a fairy tale. It's the kind of life that looks appealing in a tapestry, all soft focus and idealized, like an Instagram filter for the Middle Ages. But much like those Instagram influencers who somehow managed to look fresh-faced after a 12-hour flight, medieval art was selling a dream, not a reality. So why the discrepancy? Simple. Art was commissioned by the wealthy, and they had a vested interest in portraying the rural life as idyllic and pure. It was a way to justify their own wealth and privilege, painting their estates as harmonious microcosms rather than the feudal fiefdoms they really were. It's a bit like buying into a real estate brochure that conveniently forgets to mention the landfill next door. In reality, the fields weren't just a backdrop for pastoral bliss. They were battlegrounds for survival. Each harvest was a victory, each failed crop a defeat. And while the nobility might have dressed up the peasants' toil in poetic prose, the farmers themselves were too busy wrestling with their plows to care. The romanticized pastoral life might have been soothing to the soul, but it was hard work that kept food on the table. To add insult to injury, the church, with its promises of eternal salvation, often reinforced these social divides. It preached that everyone had their God-given place in the world, which conveniently kept the peasants in theirs. You were told to be humble, obedient, and grateful for your lot, as if poverty was a virtue and wealth a divine reward. It was a celestial endorsement of the status quo, a heavenly pat on the back for the lords, and a gentle reminder to the peasants to know their place. But let's not pretend it was all doom and gloom. There was a certain camaraderie among the farming communities, a shared understanding of life's hardships, and a collective resilience that kept them going. Festivals and holy days offered moments of respite, opportunities to let loose and forget about the endless cycle of labor, if only for a day. It was a chance to dance, feast, and maybe even forget that tomorrow would bring the same grueling routine. So, as you stand in your field, ankle-deep in reality, remember that you're part of a long lineage of toil and perseverance. Your life might not be the romanticized version in a minstrel's song, but it's real, gritty, and full of stories worth telling. And while the odds of climbing the social ladder are slim, your legacy is etched into the very soil you till. It's a reminder that even in the toughest conditions, there's a certain dignity in hard work, quiet heroism in the everyday struggle to survive against the odds. As we leave you to ponder your place in history, Remember that the story of the medieval farmer is not just about hardship and hierarchy. It's a tale of resilience, tenacity, and the unyielding human spirit. And though the social climb might be as steep as a castle wall, your contribution to the medieval world is anything but small. But let's pivot from the social ladder to something a bit more visceral, your health, or lack thereof. When it comes to medieval farming, the real kicker isn't just the endless toil or the fact that you're stuck in an economic quagmire. No, the cherry on top of this medieval sundae is the array of health hazards that could make a modern hypochondriac break into hives just reading about them. Now, if you're clutching your pitchfork and hoping for a robust constitution to see you through, think again. The average life expectancy for a medieval farmer was about 30 to 35 years, and that's if you were lucky enough to dodge the plague, starvation, or a particularly vengeful ox. In contrast, today's global life expectancy is roughly 73 years, which makes you wonder how anyone survived long enough to invent the Renaissance. Let's start with your diet, or rather the lack thereof. Your staple meal, bread, but not the artisanal, sourdough variety hipsters rave about. We're talking coarse, gritty bread made from barley or rye, with a texture that could double as a sanding block. Meat was a luxury, reserved for the Lord's table or special occasions, and fruits and vegetables were seasonal delights, not daily staples. Malnutrition was as common as mud on your boots, and it left you vulnerable to illnesses that could knock you flat faster than a knight in a jousting match. Speaking of illnesses, let's chat about the medieval medicine cabinet, or the absence of one. Colds, fevers, and infections were as frequent as a peasant's complaints about taxes, but the remedies were often deadlier than the ailments. Got a fever? Here, let's bleed you with leeches until you're paler than a ghost. Suffering from a stomach ache? Try some powdered unicorn horn. Spoiler alert, unicorns aren't real, and neither was the relief. And then there's hygiene, or the medieval version of it, which is to say, not much at all. Bathing was a rare luxury, generally indulged in a couple of times a year, if that. You shared your home with fleas and lice, the latter of which could spread typhus faster than you could say, pass the plague. And that's before we even touch on sanitation. Remember, your bathroom was essentially a hole in the ground, and let's just say waste management wasn't exactly a thriving industry. The real kicker, even a minor injury could spell doom. Step on a rusty nail, and congratulations, you've got a one-way ticket to Tetanus Town. Cut yourself while reaping crops, and you'd be lucky if an infection didn't set in. Without antibiotics, even the smallest wound could lead to a grisly end. It's like playing Russian roulette with every blister and bruise, and if you managed to dodge infections and injuries, diseases were lurking like uninvited guests at a wedding. Smallpox, dysentery, and tuberculosis were just a few of the diseases ready to pounce. The lack of knowledge about germs and bacteria meant illnesses were often attributed to bad air or divine punishment, which is about as effective as solving a crossword with a crayon. The Black Death, which swept across Europe in the mid-14th century, is the most infamous of these medieval maladies. This bubonic plague wiped out up to 60% of Europe's population, and it didn't discriminate between lord and peasant. In just a few years, it reduced the continent's numbers more efficiently than a Game of Thrones finale. But let's not overlook the more mundane threats. Childbirth was a dicey affair, with maternal mortality rates that would make a modern obstetrician shudder. And for those who made it into the world, infancy was a perilous time. Up to half of all children didn't make it past their 5th birthday, leaving parents with hearts as heavy as their harvest sacks. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't they just eat better, clean more, and go to the doctor? Well, my friend, that's the crux of the medieval conundrum. With limited resources and knowledge, the medieval farmer was caught in a cycle of poverty and ignorance. Medical practices were as primitive as the tools in your shed, and the idea of public health was about as foreign as a knight charging into battle on a pogo stick. And yet, despite it all, these farmers persevered. They might not have had modern medicine or hygiene, but they had grit and determination. They were the unsung heroes of the medieval world, keeping the population fed and the economy ticking, even as they faced odds that would make Hercules think twice. So, as you wipe the sweat from your brow and carry on with your day, remember that you're part of a legacy of resilience. It might not be glamorous, and it might not come with a long life expectancy, but it's a testament to the human spirit. You keep plowing, planting, and harvesting, because that's what you do. And maybe, just maybe, your efforts will ensure that the next generation has it a little bit easier. Now, before you start thinking this is the end of our medieval saga, hold your horses, or oxen in your case. There's more to explore, more tales to unravel, and more truths to unearth. So keep your wits about you and your plow at the ready, because we're not done yet. There's a storm of history still brewing on the horizon, and it's got your name on it. Yet, even as you're plowing through this historical tempest, let's pause and see if there's a silver lining behind those medieval storm clouds. Because, believe it or not, there was more to being a medieval farmer than just the endless grind and the grim reaper's looming shadow. There was resilience, community, and a kind of camaraderie that you won't find in any job description today. Back then, you weren't just a lone wolf fighting the elements. You were part of a village, a tightly knit group that knew the power of banding together. When the going got tough, it wasn't just you against the world. It was you and your neighbors against it. The medieval community was the original "it takes a village" scenario, long before it became a modern catchphrase. If your ox decided to retire early or your field was flooded, you could count on a fellow villager stepping in to lend a hand or a plow. Let's dive into the medieval festivities, those rare moments when the grind stopped and joy took the stage. Feast days and harvest festivals were more than just breaks from the back-breaking labor. They were communal celebrations of survival, resilience, and let's face it, a much-needed excuse to eat, drink, and be merry. The Feast of St. John or the celebration of Lammer's Day, marking the first wheat harvest, were times when the village gathered, shared food, stories, and a laugh or two. In an era where life was often short, these moments were long on joy. And don't underestimate the medieval ale, the social lubricant of the time. Beer wasn't just a beverage. It was a dietary staple, safer to drink than water, and a way to bring people together after a long day in the fields. The local alehouse was the medieval equivalent of a modern coffee shop, a place to gather, exchange news, and yes, occasionally grumble about the Lord's taxes. Now, let's talk about the enduring myth of the simpler life, the idea that once upon a time, life was pure, uncomplicated, and somehow better. This notion is as sticky as the mud on your medieval boots. People love to romanticize the past, glossing over the harshness in favor of a good story. It's the same impulse that leads us to imagine that our grandparents' generation had it all figured out, conveniently forgetting about the Great Depression or World Wars. It's easy to see why the myth persists. There's something undeniably appealing about imagining a life where your biggest worry is the weather, rather than the constant barrage of emails and notifications. But let's not kid ourselves. The medieval simpler life was anything but simple. It was a constant battle against nature, disease, and social constraints. It was a life where survival was never guaranteed, and every day was a fight to put food on the table. But here's the twist. Despite the challenges, or perhaps because of them, there was a resilience among medieval farmers that's worth celebrating. Their lives were hard, but they were also rich in ways that our modern, convenience-laden lives often aren't. The shared struggles forged bonds that transcended the individual, creating a sense of community that was as vital as the very food they grew. In the end, the story of the medieval farmer is as much about the human spirit as it is about hardship. It's a tale of tenacity, of people who faced down the elements with nothing but their hands and a stubborn will to survive. And as much as we might cringe at the thought of living in such a time, there's a part of us that can't help but admire their grit. So as you stand in your metaphorical field, looking back at the medieval landscape we've just traversed, take a moment to appreciate the legacy left by those who came before us. They were the foundation of the world we know today, their efforts etched into the soil of history. And while their lives might not have been glamorous, they were undeniably significant. As we wrap up this medieval jaunt, remember that history isn't just a collection of dates and events. It's the story of people, their struggles, and their triumphs. And in the grand tapestry of time, the medieval farmer's story is a thread that, while overlooked, is woven with resilience and community. It's a reminder that even in the toughest conditions, humans have always found a way to endure, adapt, and thrive. So here's to the medieval farmers, the unsung heroes of history. They might not have had much, but they had each other, and sometimes that's enough. As you close this chapter and look to the future, carry with you the lessons of the past, that true strength is not just in surviving, but in doing so together. And that, my friend, is a legacy worth remembering. In the arid expanses of ancient Persia, where the sun seemed to have an exclusive contract to roast everything beneath it, the people were living in what could politely be called a geopolitical smorgasbord. Before Cyrus the Great swaggered onto the scene, the region was a patchwork quilt of small kingdoms, tribes, and city-states, each with its own version of order or chaos, depending on who you asked. Now, life back then wasn't all about lounging on Persian rugs and sipping pomegranate juice. It was more like a historical version of a never-ending reality show. The Median Empire, which was the big player on the block before Cyrus decided to rewrite the script, had control over a sprawling stretch of land. This was a time when your neighbor was just as likely to invite you over for a banquet as they were to invade your territory. The Medes were the folks holding the remote control, but every channel was a different crisis waiting to happen. Enter Cyrus the Great, a man with big dreams and even bigger ambitions. Born around 600 BCE in a world where your career options were mostly limited to farming or fighting, Cyrus decided he wanted to try his hand at empire building. Think of him as the original startup founder, with a vision not for a tech company, but for a unified empire stretching across the known world. He took over the family business, that is, ruling the kingdom of Anshan, and decided it was time for a hostile takeover of the Median Empire. You might say Cyrus had a knack for turning lemons into a sprawling, powerful empire. The Medians, led by King Astyages, were sitting pretty until Cyrus came along. Astyages ruled with the kind of paranoia that would make a modern-day conspiracy theorist look like an optimist. His court was a hotbed of intrigue, a place where betrayal was as common as the scorching desert sun. But despite his efforts to control everything, he couldn't see the storm brewing in the form of Cyrus, who was more than ready to play the long game. Cyrus's strategy was simple: turn the disgruntled underlings of the Median Empire into allies. He was a master of diplomacy, often choosing to absorb rather than annihilate. By 550 BCE, Cyrus had convinced a significant portion of the Median army to switch sides. Astyages, whose foresight was evidently on vacation, found himself without a throne as Cyrus marched into the Median capital, Ecbatana, and claimed it for his own. With the fall of the Median Empire, Cyrus wasn't just a king. He was now a kingmaker, setting the stage for what would become the Achaemenid Empire. Of course, the romantic narrative would have us believe that Cyrus was some sort of benevolent conqueror, a man who spread peace like it was going out of style. But let's not kid ourselves. Building an empire in the ancient world wasn't a walk in the park. It was a brutal business, often involving forced relocations and the occasional massacre. Yet, Cyrus was smart enough to know that a little good PR went a long way. He allowed the local customs and religions to continue, which in the historical context was practically a revolutionary act of tolerance. The historical records, primarily from the likes of Herodotus and the Cyrus cylinder, paint a picture of a man who was both feared and admired. The latter, a clay tablet often hailed as the first declaration of human rights, might have been more of a clever piece of propaganda than a genuine humanitarian effort. But hey, a little spin never hurt anyone when you're trying to keep a massive, diverse empire from tearing itself apart. In the grand tapestry of history, Cyrus's conquests were the first threads in a new pattern of empire. His ability to unite disparate kingdoms under a single banner reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the ancient world. The Achaemenid Empire would go on to cover, too, 1 million square miles at its height, stretching from the Balkans to the Indus Valley, a feat that turned Cyrus from a mere mortal into a legend. As he expanded his empire, the world wasn't just changing, it was being rebuilt from the ground up. The stage was set, the pieces in place, and with Cyrus at the helm, Persia was ready to play a leading role on the world stage. With the Medians now singing a very different national anthem under Cyrus's rule, the next logical step was the Lydian Empire, a kingdom that practically glimmered with wealth thanks to King Croesus, a ruler whose name became synonymous with unimaginable riches. Located in what is today Western Turkey, Lydia was the kind of place where gold practically flowed down rivers, and its capital, Sardis, was a bustling hub of trade and prosperity. It was as if Croesus had a Midas touch, albeit one that attracted more envy than admiration from neighboring empires. Cyrus, ever the opportunist, saw in Lydia not just a land of riches, but a pivotal strategic foothold. If you wanted to be the top dog, you needed to control the economic arteries of the ancient world, and Lydia was a major vein. The clash between Cyrus and Croesus is one of those historical matchups that would have been headlining news, complete with commentators speculating on strategy like it was a Sunday sports game. The year was 547 BCE, and the stage was set for what many thought would be a classic showdown. Croesus, with his reputed wealth, believed he could buy his way to victory with the help of mercenaries and allies from Babylon and Egypt. But Cyrus had other plans. Cyrus wasn't about to march into battle without a game plan. His military strategy was like a masterclass in ancient warfare. He cleverly used the terrain to his advantage, luring the Lydian forces into a trap by feigning retreat, a move that would make any modern tactician nod in appreciation. The decisive battle took place near the city of Thymbra, where Cyrus deployed his troops in an innovative formation that resembled a crescent, surrounding the Lydian cavalry. It was a textbook example of divide and conquer, and by the end of the day, Croesus found himself not only outmaneuvered, but also out of luck. As Croesus retreated to Sardis, Cyrus did something unexpected. He offered leniency. Instead of razing the city and leaving a trail of destruction, he captured Croesus and treated him with respect, a move that was as much about consolidating power as it was about public relations. This act of mercy was a page straight out of his kill them with kindness playbook, and it worked like a charm. By sparing Croesus and incorporating Lydia into his empire, Cyrus sent a clear message. Resistance was futile, but cooperation was rewarded. Cyrus's approach wasn't just about winning battles, it was about winning hearts and minds. By allowing local customs and governance to continue under Persian oversight, he ensured that his rule was seen as a stabilizing force rather than an occupying one. This was ancient soft power at its finest, and it laid the groundwork for his next big conquest, Babylon. Ah, Babylon. The very name conjures images of grandeur, with its legendary hanging gardens and immense walls that stretched 56 miles around the city. By 539 BCE, this jewel of Mesopotamia was ripe for the taking. After his success in Lydia, Cyrus set his sights on Babylon, but he knew that a direct assault on such a heavily fortified city would be a nightmare. Instead, he opted for subtlety over siege, a strategy that would become the stuff of legend. First, Cyrus capitalized on Babylon's internal discontent. The Babylonian king, Nabonidus, wasn't exactly winning any popularity contests, largely because he had a habit of neglecting traditional religious practices and spending more time in the desert than in the palace. Cyrus, ever the astute observer of human nature, exploited this discontent by portraying himself as a liberator. He promised to restore traditional religious rituals and respect local customs, which, for the Babylonians, was like offering a glass of water to someone lost in the desert. The actual conquest of Babylon was a masterstroke of cunning. Instead of a bloody siege, Cyrus found a more ingenious way in. The Euphrates River, which ran through the city, was both its lifeline and its Achilles heel. By diverting the river's flow, Cyrus's troops were able to enter through the riverbed under the cover of darkness, catching the Babylonians completely off guard. It was less a battle and more a brilliant bit of water management, and by the time the sun rose, Cyrus had added Babylon to his growing list of acquisitions. Once again, Cyrus didn't disappoint on the PR front. His entry into Babylon was marked not by force, but by fanfare. He issued the famous Cyrus Cylinder, a declaration that promised respect for the city's inhabitants and their traditions. Often referred to as the first charter of human rights, it proclaimed freedom for the oppressed and the restoration of temples and religious practices. This was public relations gold, and further cemented Cyrus's reputation as a magnanimous ruler. But how much of this benevolent image was genuine, and how much was savvy statecraft? While Cyrus's policies were certainly more tolerant than those of many contemporaries, it's crucial to remember that his actions also served a pragmatic purpose. By fostering goodwill among the conquered peoples, Cyrus created a stable, loyal base from which to expand his empire further. In other words, his kindness was as strategic as it was sincere. Yet, behind this facade of benevolence, let's not forget the harsh realities of empire building. The Persian juggernaut was, after all, built on the backs of soldiers and laborers, and maintaining such a vast territory required constant vigilance and, at times, brute force. While Cyrus's approach was more carrot than stick, the stick was never too far out of reach. In the grand narrative of history, Cyrus the Great emerges as both a visionary leader and a shrewd politician. He understood that power wasn't just about swords and soldiers. It was also about hearts and minds. By blending diplomacy with military might, he set the template for empire building that would influence generations to come. Yet, as we delve deeper into the annals of history, we must ask ourselves, was Cyrus truly the peace-loving conqueror he's often portrayed as, or was he simply a master of the ancient art of spin? Stay tuned, as there's still much more to uncover about the man who laid the foundations of an empire that would stand the test of time. But enough about Cyrus's conquest and cunning. Let's talk about how he kept this sprawling empire from turning into ancient chaos. Sure, conquering lands is a neat trick, but what do you do the morning after when your empire's bigger than a teenager's appetite? Welcome to empire-building economics, where the stakes are high and the logistics even higher. First up, feeding an army. Forget the romantic notion of knights in shining armor. We're talking about thousands of soldiers who prefer their armor not to rust, but their bellies full. Keeping these troops fed was no small feat. Picture this. The Persian army wasn't just a band of marauders. It was a well-oiled machine. Cyrus needed to ensure a steady supply of grain and livestock, which meant establishing a network of supply depots and trade routes that spanned continents. And this wasn't just for the soldiers. The civilian population also needed sustenance. Grain became the empire's lifeblood, and it flowed through an intricate system of canals and roads like ancient veins. Speaking of roads, let's talk logistics. Cyrus built a network of roads that would make even the most ambitious highway planner blush. The Royal Road, a marvel of its time, connected Sardis in the west to Susa in the east, stretching nearly 677 miles. That's like walking from New York City to Albuquerque, but with fewer rest stops and more ancient ruins. This road was crucial for military movements, trade, and communication. It was the backbone of the empire, and Cyrus knew that a well-maintained road was as essential as a sharp sword. Now, what good are roads without a postal system? Enter the Persian couriers, the FedEx of the ancient world. This wasn't just about delivering birthday cards. It was the Twitter of its day, a rapid communication network that allowed Cyrus to keep his finger on the pulse of his vast empire. Messages could travel the length of the Royal Road in about a week, thanks to relay stations where fresh horses and riders were always ready. Herodotus, the ancient historian, famously marveled at this system, noting that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night could stop these couriers. A line so catchy it could sell stamps. But let's not get too starry-eyed. This system wasn't just about efficiency, it was about control. By ensuring messages could travel quickly, Cyrus could quash revolts before they gained momentum, making rebellion as futile as trying to stop a river with a basket. It was a brilliant mix of soft power and hard reality, showing that sometimes the pen, or in this case, the clay tablet, was mightier than the sword. Now, to keep the empire's lights on, metaphorically speaking, of course, Cyrus had to ensure a steady flow of resources. This brings us to one of his lesser-known innovations, standardized coinage. The Lydians remember them with their rivers of gold. They were the first to introduce coins, and Cyrus, ever the savvy ruler, adopted this practice for his empire. It simplified trade and taxation, turning the economy from a barter-heavy system to a more streamlined monetary one. This wasn't just about making life easier for merchants. It was about consolidating power. With coins stamped with royal insignia circulating through the empire, Cyrus's presence was felt in every transaction, a constant reminder of who was boss. But how did he keep this economic juggernaut from going off the rails? Administration, my friends. Cyrus was a pioneer in creating a bureaucratic system that would make paperwork enthusiasts swoon. The empire was divided into satrapies, regions governed by satraps, or provincial governors. These satraps were the eyes and ears of the king, ensuring that taxes flowed into the royal coffers and that local issues were managed effectively. It was a delicate balance of autonomy and oversight, a system that allowed the empire to run smoothly while keeping local rulers in check. And let's not forget the tax system. Oh, the joy of taxes. But seriously, Cyrus understood that a fair and efficient tax system was crucial for stability. Taxes weren't just a burden. They were the grease that kept the empire's wheels turning. The key was flexibility. Taxes were adjusted based on the region's economic capacity, ensuring that no one was overly burdened, but everyone contributed. This pragmatic approach kept the population relatively content and the treasury full, a win-win in any emperor's playbook. Now, while all this sounds like a well-oiled machine, let's not forget the bumps in the road. Maintaining such a vast empire required constant vigilance and adaptability. The satraps, while effective, could also become too powerful, leading to potential rebellions, a reality not lost on Cyrus, who had to occasionally remind them who was in charge. And while coins and roads were great, they couldn't replace the need for a strong military presence, a fact that kept the Persian army on its toes and Cyrus's generals busy. In this grand tapestry of logistics and administration, Cyrus's policies not only kept the empire humming, but also impressed the Greeks. Yes, those famously skeptical Greeks who usually preferred to roll their eyes rather than applaud. They saw in Persia a model of efficiency and governance that was hard to ignore, even if they weren't ready to embrace it wholeheartedly. For the Greeks, who were more used to city-states bickering like siblings, the Persian Empire must have seemed like a well-disciplined orchestra playing an unfamiliar but intriguing tune. So, while Cyrus's conquests might grab the headlines, it was his economic acumen and administrative prowess that ensured the empire's longevity. This wasn't just about building an empire, it was about building a legacy. And as we look back at this chapter of history, it's clear that Cyrus was more than just a conqueror. He was an architect of empire, laying the foundations for what would become one of history's most enduring legacies. But hold onto your helmets, because we're not done yet. The story of Cyrus the Great and his empire is far from over. There's still more intrigue, more conquests, and more lessons to learn from one of history's greatest rulers. So stay tuned as we continue to unravel the fascinating tale of the Achaemenid Empire. There's plenty more to discover in the chapters ahead. As we unravel the intricacies of Cyrus's empire, let's shift gears a bit, from the nuts and bolts of administration to the vibrant mosaic of cultures that Cyrus managed to stitch together. If empire building was his craft, then cultural integration was his art form. And boy, did he paint with a broad brush. Let's start with the obvious. The Persian Empire under Cyrus was massive. We're talking about a domain that sprawled from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. Imagine the logistics of managing this expanse without modern conveniences like GPS or Google Translate. But Cyrus had something even better, an understanding of cultural symbiosis. He realized that ruling a potpourri of peoples meant more than just shouting orders from a gilded throne. It was about letting each culture flourish under the Persian umbrella. This wasn't just a feel-good strategy, but a sheer necessity to keep the empire from fracturing like a poorly baked pita. Now, if you were a subject in the Persian Empire, daily life might have felt oddly familiar. Why? Because Cyrus had this nifty policy of letting people keep their languages, customs, and religions. It was like being absorbed by an empire that didn't want to turn you into a carbon copy of itself. Talk about a refreshing change in a world where cultural bulldozing was more the norm. This approach turned Persia into a veritable United Nations of the ancient world, a cultural superpower long before the phrase was coined. One of the crown jewels in Cyrus's cultural diadem was the city of Babylon. After its peaceful acquisition, thanks to some brilliant hydraulic engineering, Cyrus took a hands-off approach that won hearts faster than a Babylonian bard could strum a lyre. He restored religious practices and returned sacred idols that had been carted off by previous rulers, which, in a deeply pious city, was a masterstroke of diplomacy. This wasn't Cyrus playing nice. It was Cyrus playing smart. It was the ancient equivalent of a political leader turning up at a local festival and actually enjoying the food. But let's not kid ourselves. This multicultural harmony wasn't just about Cyrus being some ancient world philanthropist. The real genius was how these diverse cultures fed into the empire's strength. The Persian military, for instance, was a kaleidoscope of different ethnic units, each bringing their unique combat skills to the table. Think of it as a historical precursor to the strength through diversity mantra. Different languages, different tactics, all under one unified command. It was like assembling an ancient version of the Avengers, with fewer capes and more spears. Diving deeper into this cultural melting pot, we stumble upon the Cyrus cylinder, a small clay artifact with big claims. Often touted as the first declaration of human rights, it's a feel-good story if there ever was one. But let's dig a little deeper. The cylinder, found in Babylon and dating back to 539 BCE, is essentially Cyrus's victory lap, inscribed in cuneiform. It declares his intentions to restore temples and let deported peoples return home. A nice touch, certainly. But was it a genuine manifesto for universal human rights, or just the world's oldest PR stunt? Given the context, the latter seems more plausible. Cylinder was more than just a diplomatic tool. It was a masterclass in spin. It painted Cyrus as a liberator and a benevolent ruler, a narrative that stuck around like a catchy jingle. It's no small feat to have your propaganda endure for millennia. Yet, for all its romantic allure, the cylinder primarily served to justify Cyrus's rule to his new subjects. It was a savvy way to say, "Hey, I'm here to help," while subtly reminding everyone who was in charge. Still, let's not diminish its significance entirely. The idea that a ruler would publicly proclaim a policy of tolerance and restoration was groundbreaking. It set a precedent that future leaders would look back on with varying degrees of admiration and skepticism. It was like planting a seed of human rights in the fertile soil of empire, even if that seed wouldn't fully sprout for centuries. But here's the kicker. Cyrus wasn't just a ruler with a knack for good PR. He was a strategist who understood optics. By promoting a narrative of peace and restoration, he not only maintained order, but also attracted the best minds from across his empire. Artists, scholars, and architects flocked to Persia, eager to contribute to this grand tapestry. It was a brain gain of epic proportions, turning the empire into a cultural powerhouse that dazzled even the cynical Greeks. Well, some of them, anyway. While it's tempting to paint Cyrus as the ancient poster child for multiculturalism, let's not airbrush the portrait. His policies were as much about pragmatism as they were about principle. By allowing cultural autonomy, he minimized resistance and maximized loyalty, a smart move when ruling over millions. It was less about altruistic ideals and more about ensuring the empire didn't splinter into 1,000 warring factions. In the grand scheme of things, Cyrus's cultural policies were both revolutionary and cunning. They laid the foundation for an empire that wasn't just feared but respected. Yet, as we marvel at the cultural mosaic he cultivated, we must also recognize the practical machinations behind it. Cyrus wasn't just a cultural hero. He was a ruler who understood that sometimes the best way to control an empire was to let it breathe. As we peel back the layers of this ancient tale, we find a leader who deftly balanced power with perception, unity with diversity. But don't pack up your curiosity just yet. There's more to explore in the saga of the Achaemenid Empire. From the peaks of cultural integration to the valleys of political intrigue, Cyrus's story continues to unravel, inviting us to question everything we thought we knew about empires and the men who built them. Stay tuned, because if history has taught us anything, it's that the past is never quite what it seems. So, as we continue this roller coaster through ancient Persia, we hit the point where Cyrus the Great, the empire's charismatic architect, finally faces the inevitability that even the mightiest ruler can't escape: mortality. Around 530 BCE, after a life spent building an empire that made other kingdoms look like quaint villages, Cyrus died during a campaign against the Massageti, nomadic tribe in Central Asia. His death was as enigmatic as some of his achievements, wrapped in layers of myth and reality. Some say he fell in battle, while others weave tales of betrayal. Whatever the truth, his passing left a power vacuum that would make any Game of Thrones fan sit up and take notice. With Cyrus gone, the empire he painstakingly constructed was left in the capable, or not so capable, hands of his successors. His son Cambyses Roman II took the reins, and if you're expecting a seamless transition, you might want to lower those expectations. Cambyses had the unenviable task of following in his father's colossal footsteps, and while he did manage to add Egypt to the Persian portfolio, his methods were, shall we say, less diplomatic. While Cyrus was the empire's charismatic statesman, Cambyses was more akin to a bull in a china shop, charging into Egypt with all the subtlety of a rock concert in a library. Cambyses' reign was marked by a series of conquests, but also by growing unrest. The Egyptians, not particularly thrilled with being annexed, revolted. Meanwhile, back home, rumors of Cambyses' erratic behavior, think more Caligula than Cyrus, began to circulate. If there were awards for ruling with charm, Cambyses was unlikely to make the shortlist. The empire teetered on the edge of chaos, and it didn't help that Cambyses died mysteriously in 522 BCE, possibly by his own hand, possibly through foul play. Enter Darius I, a distant relative who seized the throne amidst the turmoil, claiming divine right and a bit of luck. Darius was a bureaucrat at heart, more of a paper pusher than a warrior, but he had one thing going for him, a mind like a steel trap. He stamped out revolts faster than you can say, rebellion, and set about reorganizing the empire with the rigor of a perfectionist. Darius expanded the empire even further, pushing into the Indus Valley and dabbling in European territories. He was the man behind the construction of Persepolis, the empire's glittering capital, a city that would have made even the most lavish Vegas hotel blush. But for all his achievements, he faced persistent Greek resistance, a thorn in Persia's side that would eventually bloom into a full-blown hedge with the rise of Alexander the Great. Darius's reign was a balancing act of expansion and consolidation, but he lacked Cyrus's ability to win over hearts and minds. Now, if you're wondering how all of this ties into modern political thought, consider this. Cyrus's empire, with its relatively progressive policies, left a template for governance that echoes through history. His approach to leadership, which balanced military might with cultural respect, has been cited as an early model of enlightened rule. Cyrus's legacy is often invoked in discussions of human rights, with the Cyrus cylinder finding resonance in modern charters. The idea that a ruler should be both strong and kind, feared yet respected, remains a benchmark for leaders today, though finding someone who checks all those boxes is as rare as ancient Persian coins. Yet for all the admiration, let's not gloss over the reality. The Persian Empire, with its sprawling bureaucracy, was also a machine of control. The roads and postal system were as much about maintaining order as they were about fostering communication. The satrapies, while allowing some local autonomy, were a way to keep potential rebellions under a tight lid. Cyrus's policies were as much about ensuring stability as they were about promoting freedom. It's a reminder that history is often written by those who win, and narratives can be as pliable as the clay tablets they were inscribed on. As we sift through the sands of time, separating legend from fact, one thing is clear. Cyrus the Great was a ruler of extraordinary vision, whose ability to unite diverse peoples under a single banner was as much about strategy as it was about charisma. His story, a blend of myth and reality, continues to captivate because it speaks to the timeless human quest for power, unity, and legacy. In the annals of history, Cyrus remains a towering figure, not just for what he accomplished, but for how he did it, with a flair that left an indelible mark on the world. And there you have it, the rise and legacy of Cyrus the Great, a saga of ambition, conquest, and cultural fusion. His empire may have long since crumbled into ruins, but the foundations he laid continue to influence the world in ways that are both grand and subtle. As we close this chapter, remember that history is as much about the lessons learned as the legends left behind. So, whether you're inspired by Cyrus's achievements or awed by the enormity of his ambitions, one thing's for sure. His story is one for the ages, a testament to the enduring allure of empire and the complexities of human nature. You're standing on a rugged, windswept cliff somewhere in Scandinavia, surrounded by the swirling mists of legend and lore. But hold onto your helmet, because we're diving into the electrifying world of the Viking Berserkers, those infamous warriors who seem to have a penchant for going all-out beast mode before anyone even knew what that meant. It's around the 8th to 11th centuries, give or take a few decades, and these guys are the rock stars of Norse society, minus the guitars and with a lot more axes. Now, let's get one thing straight. The Berserkers were not your average run-of-the-mill Viking. Oh no, they were the Norse equivalent of a special forces unit, revered, and let's be honest, a little bit feared by their fellow Vikings. The term Berserker itself is believed to derive from either bare shirt or bear shirt, which doesn't mean they were running into battle half-naked for the thrill of it, although, knowing the Vikings, you can't completely rule it out. More likely, it refers to their ability to don a bear's skin and channel that animal's ferocity, or perhaps they just preferred to fight without the burden of armor. Either way, they were the real deal. So, what set these warriors apart? Well, according to the sagas and a smattering of historical accounts, Berserkers could enter a trance-like fury that made them practically unstoppable in battle. They'd howl like wolves, bite their shields, and, rumor has it, not feel pain. Imagine facing one of these guys on a battlefield. It's enough to make you want to turn tail and row all the way back to your fjord. But before we get too carried away, let's talk historical accuracy. Sure, the legends are colorful, but they also tend to be a bit, let's say, embellished. The idea of berserkers as these invincible, frenzied warriors is the stuff of Norse legend, but historians have had a field day poking holes in these tales. Some suggest that the berserkers' famed fury wasn't purely due to supernatural strength or the spirit of the bear. Instead, it might have been more of a chemically induced state. There's speculation that they consumed hallucinogens like the Amanita muscaria mushroom, known for its psychoactive properties, to work themselves into a frenzy. Think of it as ancient performance-enhancing drugs with a side of hallucinations. And lest we forget, the berserker fury wasn't all fun and games. Sure, it might have made them terrifying on the battlefield, but it came with its own set of downsides. Historical accounts, like those from the Icelandic sagas, talk about berserkers being unpredictable and often violent even off the battlefield. They were known for causing havoc in their communities, which made them as much a danger at home as they were an asset in war. It's kind of like hiring a security guard who occasionally trashes your living room. Now, let's dig into some archaeological and historical tidbits. The mention of berserkers pops up in various sagas and poems, like the Hervarar saga Ok Heidreks and the epic Unglinga saga, penned by the ever-quotable Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century. While Snorri wasn't exactly an eyewitness, more like a Norse historian with a flair for drama, his writings give us a glimpse into how these warriors were perceived. He described them as those who wrought themselves up to such a fury that they howled like wild beasts, bit their shields, and cut down everything they met. Yeah, not exactly the kind of guy you invite over for a cozy dinner. And speaking of cozy, life back in Viking times was anything but. The society was a complex web of chieftains, warriors, farmers, and traders, all vying for survival in a harsh environment. The berserkers' role was crucial in raids and battles, but their presence also served a political purpose. In a society where might often made right, having a berserker or two on your side was like having a couple of ticking time bombs that could explode in your enemy's face. It's no wonder that they were both revered and kept at arm's length. But here's the kicker. Despite their fearsome reputation, the berserkers eventually fell out of favor. As Viking society evolved and the influence of Christianity spread, the old pagan ways, including the berserker rage, were increasingly viewed as barbaric. By the time the 11th century rolled around, the berserkers were more relics of a bygone era than the battlefront heroes they once were. Some even suggest that the outlawing of berserkers was an early form of crowd control, a way to ensure that the social order wasn't constantly disrupted by a bunch of guys who took rage against the machine a little too literally. So, as you stand on that cliff, soaking in the echoes of Viking roars and the whispers of history, remember this. The berserkers were legendary for a reason, but the reality was far more nuanced than the sagas might have you believe. They were products of their time, heroes and outcasts, warriors and potential liabilities, all wrapped up in one ferocious package. And as with most legends, their story is a reminder that even the fiercest warriors are still human, prone to the same flaws and follies as the rest of us. Now, while the berserkers' fall from grace might sound like the end of a metal concert, when someone pulls the plug, their story doesn't quite stop there. Let's crank up the volume again and dive into the initiation rites that turned ordinary men into these legendary warriors. Spoiler alert, it wasn't exactly a weekend retreat with trust falls and S-mores. Nope, this was more like a boot camp on steroids, with a side of ritual sacrifice. First up, we've got animal sacrifices. Now, before you imagine something straight out of a horror movie, remember this. For the Vikings, sacrifice was a way to communicate with the gods. And these weren't just any gods. They were the Norse deities who made the Greek pantheon look like a bunch of soap opera stars. Odin, the chief god, was particularly fond of receiving a good sacrifice. He was the god of war, wisdom, and poetry, which might explain why the Berserkers were as poetic as they were brutal. Sacrificing a bear, or a wolf, therefore, was seen as a way to channel the ferocity and strength of these creatures directly into the warrior. It's like picking up a power-up in a video game, but with a lot more blood and guts involved. But animal sacrifices were just the opening act. The real test came in the form of brutal physical trials. Think of this as the ancient equivalent of the Ironman triathlon, minus the spandex. Candidates had to withstand extreme cold, go without food, and endure pain that would make even the toughest modern-day athlete wince. It was all about proving their mettle, not just physically, but mentally. After all, you can't go into a berserker rage if you're worried about a little frostbite. So, why put yourself through all this? Well, being a berserker was a ticket to the big leagues. These warriors were more than just muscle for hire. They were a symbol of power and prestige. In a society where strength and courage were the currencies of the day, becoming a berserker was like winning the lottery. It meant honor, respect, and let's be honest, a healthy dose of fear from your peers. But let's not kid ourselves. There was also a psychological component. The initiation rites weren't just about building physical strength. They were designed to test the limits of human endurance and reshape the mind. In a world where survival often hinged on ferocity, the ability to tap into a berserker's fury was seen as the ultimate weapon. Now, let's talk economics. Yes, even berserkers had to deal with the harsh realities of supply and demand. While they were invaluable in battle, maintaining such a warrior wasn't cheap. Animal skins for their iconic bear shirts didn't grow on trees, and feeding a berserker after a bout of fury could probably clear out the village pantry. Yet, for chieftains looking to intimidate rivals or expand their territory, investing in berserkers was like hiring a personal army of one-man wrecking crews. The benefits often outweighed the costs, at least until one of them decided to redecorate the longhouse with an axe. And while we're on the subject of myths, let's address the elephant, or rather, the bear, in the room. Thanks to pop culture, we're led to believe that berserkers were lone wolves, prowling the battlefield in a haze of bloodlust. But historical texts suggest a more nuanced picture. Berserkers were often part of elite groups, working alongside other warriors to achieve strategic goals. They were the shark troops, sent in to break enemy lines and sow chaos. And while their methods were anything but subtle, they were incredibly effective. It's a bit like sending in a wrecking ball when you're trying to make a point. Messy, but hard to ignore. We can thank the likes of Snorri Sturluson again for much of what we know. He certainly had a flair for the dramatic, with his descriptions of berserkers biting shields and howling like beasts. Yet, when you peel back the layers of mythology, you find a complex interplay of societal and psychological factors driving these rituals. The berserkers weren't just mindless brutes. They were products of their environment, shaped by the harsh realities of Viking life and the ever-present shadow of war. In dissecting the reality from the myth, one has to consider that the berserkers were more than just warriors. They were symbols. They embodied the Norse ideals of bravery, strength, and the willingness to face death head-on. And while the romanticized image of the berserker persists in everything from video games to heavy metal lyrics, the truth is far more compelling. These were men who walked a fine line between humanity and the wild, driven by rituals that tested every fiber of their being. So, the next time you catch a glimpse of a bearskin-clad warrior on screen, remember, the real berserkers were a testament to human endurance and the lengths one would go to in order to survive and thrive in a brutal world. As we wrap up this step in our saga, keep this in mind. The life of a berserker was as much about the mind as it was about muscle. And in the game of survival, that made all the difference. Stay tuned, because the saga of the berserkers is far from over, and there's plenty more to uncover in the next chapter of their storied existence. And so, in the relentless saga of Viking berserkers, we find ourselves delving into the world that created these legendary warriors. To understand why berserkers were both indispensable and terrifying, we need to look at the economic and political tapestry of Viking society. Yes, even the Vikings needed to balance their budgets and curry favor with the right leaders. It turns out that the berserkers were more than just brawny individuals with a penchant for biting shields. They were strategic assets in a world where power meant everything. Picture the Viking Age, roughly 793 to 1066 AD, as a bustling, albeit a bit chaotic, period of expansion. The Vikings were traders, raiders, and explorers, known to travel as far as the Byzantine Empire and the fringes of North America. This wasn't just about pillaging for the thrill of it. Oh no, it was about economics. Cold, hard silver, to be precise. You see, Viking society was deeply transactional. They didn't just raid monasteries for the spiritual challenge. They were after the treasures, gold, silver, and anything else that could be melted down or traded. Enter the Berserkers, the Viking version of a high-risk, high-reward investment. Maintaining these warriors was no small feat. They demanded resources. Bare skins don't come cheap, and their legendary post-battle appetites could put a dent in any longhouse larder. To give you some perspective, single bear pelt could cost the equivalent of several cows. That's a lot of milk and meat for one warrior's wardrobe. And let's not forget the cost of those hallucinogenic mushrooms they might have indulged in. Amanita muscaria doesn't exactly grow in every backyard, and its procurement was a serious business. But why were these expense-laden warriors worth it? Well, in terms of political leverage, having a berserker on your side was like wielding a dragon in a game of chess. Chieftains used them to intimidate rivals and expand their influence. Imagine facing a chieftain backed by a clan of berserkers, each one a whirlwind of fury on the battlefield. It's enough to make a rival think twice before challenging for territory or power. The berserkers were the ultimate deterrent, their reputation alone often enough to sway the outcome of a potential conflict without a single axe being swung. Now, let's talk about the Viking raids themselves, those infamous expeditions that have fueled countless tales of adventure and terror. The Berserkers played a critical role here as well. They were the shark troops, the ones who led the charge and broke enemy lines. Their reputation preceded them, which often led to psychological victories before the physical battle even began. Villages and towns would hear of the Berserkers' approach and succumb to fear, sometimes opting to surrender rather than face the wrath of these human hurricanes. It was a classic case of win the battle before it starts, a strategy that Sun Tzu himself would have admired if he'd had a bunch of berserkers to back him. And while berserkers were vital on the battlefield, they were also key players in the broader Viking economy. The raids they led and participated in weren't just for glory. They were about securing resources and trade goods that fueled the Viking economies back home. Precious metals, slaves, and exotic goods flowed into Scandinavia from these expeditions, enriching chieftains and traders alike. The Vikings established extensive trade networks across Europe and beyond, connecting the furthest reaches of the known world. From the silver mines of the Caliphate to the bustling markets of Constantinople, Viking traders bartered goods that most Europeans could only dream of seeing. Berserkers, with their fearsome reputations, ensured that these trade routes remained open and profitable. In this economy, where a successful raid could mean the difference between famine and feast, berserkers were indispensable. They were the linchpin of Viking military strategy, and their presence often meant the difference between success and failure. To put it another way, they were the rock stars of the Viking expeditions. Minus the tour bus and groupies, though, let's face it, they probably had a few admirers. Their exploits and terrifying reputations were woven into the sagas and songs, ensuring their deeds would resonate throughout history. Let's not sugarcoat it, though. Life as a berserker wasn't all glory and riches. It came with its own set of downsides, primarily the constant threat of death and the strain of always being on the edge of civilization. Berserkers were both revered and feared within their own communities. Their unpredictable nature made them as much a danger at home as abroad, and their allegiance was often bought rather than owed. This precarious balance of fear and respect ensured that while chieftains valued their berserkers, they also kept a wary eye on them. Moreover, as Viking society evolved and Christianity began to spread its roots, the role of the berserker started to change. The berserkers' pagan practices and ferocious ways didn't sit well with the new religious ethos. By the 11th century, the tide was turning against them. The same qualities that once made them indispensable were now seen as liabilities. Berserkers were increasingly viewed as relics of a pagan past, and their outlandish behaviors were less tolerated. It's like when your favorite band goes mainstream, and suddenly everyone's over it. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's still more to this tale. For now, though, let's pause and appreciate the intricate web of economics and politics that made Berserkers both necessary and feared. They were the ultimate instruments of power in a world where might often made right. Their legendary fury, which terrified enemies and secured riches, was as much a product of their environment as it was of their ferocious nature. So, as we stand at this point in the Berserker's tale, remember, these warriors were more than just myth. They were the embodiment of the Viking spirit, a testament to the lengths a society will go to ensure its survival and dominance. Their story is far from over, and as we continue to unravel the threads of their history, we'll discover even more about what made these legendary figures tick. Stay tuned, because the Berserkers have a few more surprises up their bearskin sleeves. Speaking of surprises tucked into those bearskin sleeves, let's pull back the curtain on the myths and legends that have painted the Berserkers as the ultimate wild men of history. It's time to separate the wolves from the sheep and see how much of what we know about these warriors is as real as a Norse god's blessing on a Tuesday. First off, let's get something straight. The Berserkers didn't quite have a PR team, but if they did, they'd probably give the best PR spin doctors a run for their money. Much of what we know about these fierce fighters comes from sagas and poems, the ancient Norse equivalent of a Netflix series binge-watched around the fire during long, cold winters. These stories were passed down orally for generations before being put to parchment, and let's just say the storytellers had a flair for the dramatic. Enter Snorri Sturluson, our go-to guy for Berserker lore. His 13th century works like the Unglinga saga describe Berserkers as practically supernatural beings, capable of feats that would leave modern action heroes green with envy. Now, before you start picturing these guys as Thor's unruly cousins, let's dig a little deeper. The Berserker mythos often includes tales of warriors transforming into animals or being immune to fire and steel, claims that make for great stories but less convincing history. The truth is probably a bit more grounded. The so-called animal transformation, likely a combination of psychological conditioning and ritualistic attire. Those bear shirts weren't just fashion statements. They were a psychological tool meant to intimidate foes and inspire the Berserker wearing them. Imagine facing down a snarling warrior, cloaked in the skin of a bear, eyes wild and voice howling like a storm. You'd probably reconsider your life choices pretty quickly. But what about the Berserker's supposed invulnerability? Well, chalk that up to the power of reputation. In a world where stories were as potent as swords, the legend of the Berserker's invincibility spread faster than a Viking raid, often causing enemies to surrender without a fight. This psychological warfare was bolstered by their fearsome battle tactics, charging headlong into enemy lines, seemingly indifferent to pain or death. Of course, claiming that a Berserker couldn't be harmed by fire or steel made for good strategic propaganda, even if it wasn't strictly true. If you believe your opponent can't be killed, you're already halfway to defeat. Now, let's fast forward to modern times, where the Berserkers have been reimagined in countless films and video games. Hollywood and gaming studios have taken these already larger-than-life figures and cranked the dial up to 11. In films, Berserkers are often portrayed as lone warriors, rampaging through battlefields in slow-motion glory. It's the kind of cinematic flair that makes for great popcorn entertainment, but it misses the mark on historical accuracy. Real Berserkers were part of a unit, a cog in the war machine, not solitary stars in a Viking action flick. Video games, too, have had a field day with the Berserker image. Titles like Assassin's Creed Valhalla and God of War revel in the Berserkers' mythic reputation, casting them as unstoppable, axe-wielding juggernauts. While these portrayals are thrilling, they often gloss over the gritty realities of Berserker life, the sheer physical and psychological toll of their lifestyle, not to mention the societal consequences of their unpredictable, often violent behavior. Forget the carefully choreographed fight sequences. Real Berserkers were more about raw power than finesse, more battering ram than ballet dancer. The appeal of these myths is undeniable. Who wouldn't want to believe in warriors who could channel the strength of beasts and become untouchable in battle? It's a romantic notion, one that speaks to a deep-seated human fascination with power and transformation. But while the stories of Berserkers might inspire awe, the reality was far less glamorous. These warriors lived hard, fought hard, and often died young. Their lives were marked by violence, not just on the battlefield, but within their own communities. They were feared as much for their rages off the field as for their prowess on it. And let's not ignore the economic and political context that helped these myths endure. For Viking chieftains, the legend of the Berserkers was a valuable asset. Promoting stories of their invincible warriors was a way to bolster their own status and deter rivals. It was a bit like modern brands leveraging celebrity endorsements, except instead of selling sneakers, they were selling the idea of unbeatable martial power. And just like today, perception was often more valuable than reality. But here's where things get really interesting. As Christianity spread throughout Scandinavia, the pagan practices and beliefs that underpinned the Berserker ethos began to clash with the new religious order. The church wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea of warriors going into battle in a drug-induced frenzy, invoking pagan deities and causing havoc in their wake. The Berserkers' days were numbered, but their legends endured, woven into the fabric of Norse culture, and later romanticized by storytellers and historians alike. So, next time you see a Berserker on screen or pick up a controller to embody one in a game, remember that these portrayals, while entertaining, just echoes of the real deal. Behind the tales of invincibility and animal transformation lies a gritty reality of warriors who were as much a product of their harsh environment as they were architects of their own legend. They were fierce, yes, but also flawed, human in their strength and in their weaknesses. As we close this chapter on the Berserker myths, keep in mind that the truth is often more compelling than the fiction. These warriors were part of a complex social fabric, their lives intertwined with the economic and political currents of their time. Their legend continues to captivate us, not just because of their fearsome reputation, but because they embody a timeless struggle, the desire to transcend our limitations and become more than we are. And in that, perhaps, lies the real power of the Berserker saga, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, human spirit and ingenuity can forge stories that last a millennium. So, here we are, standing at the crossroads of myth and history, with the Berserkers straddling the line like a Norse guard, testing their balance on the Bifrost. We've unraveled the legends, delved into the gritty reality, and now it's time to explore the lasting legacy of these iconic warriors. Spoiler alert, they left more than just a trail of broken shields and terrified foes in their wake. Fast forward to the decline of the Berserkers, a story not unlike the closing act of a heavy metal concert where the lights dim and the crowd disperses, leaving behind echoes of what once was. As the Viking Age drew to a close around the late 11th century, the Berserkers found themselves increasingly out of tune with the evolving melody of Scandinavian society. Christianity was making its mark, bringing with it a new set of values that didn't exactly jive with the Berserkers' pagan-fueled rage. The church had a rather dim view of warriors who entered battle in a trance, invoking ancient gods and consuming questionable substances. Think less holy communion, more unholy chaos. By the time King Harold Hardrada met his end at Stamford Bridge in 1066, marking the unofficial end of the Viking Age, Berserkers were becoming historical footnotes, slowly edged out by the tide of change. The laws of the land shifted, and the once feared Berserkers were seen more as relics of a bygone era than the unstoppable forces they had been. Yet, like any good legend, the Berserkers didn't just fade into obscurity. Their story lived on, woven into the fabric of history, and continuing to influence literature and media. From the blood-soaked pages of the Icelandic sagas to the swashbuckling adventures of modern novels, Berserkers have remained a fixture in the collective imagination. Take Shakespeare, for instance. Sure, the bard didn't pen a play titled Berserkers Gone Wild, but he certainly knew the value of a good warrior archetype. Characters like Macbeth echo the Berserker spirit, driven by ambition and a touch of madness, though Macbeth could have used a few lessons in battle strategy from our bare-shirted friends. And let's not skip over the influence of Berserkers on modern pop culture. They've been immortalized in everything from fantasy novels to video games, where they're often depicted as the ultimate combatants, their mythic fury distilled into pixelated form. But while pop culture loves to play up the Berserkers' supernatural prowess, it often glosses over the harsher truths of their existence. The real Berserkers lived in a world of violence and unpredictability, and their rage wasn't just for show. It was a survival mechanism in a brutal age. Now, you might be wondering, why we're so captivated by these warriors. What is it about the Berserkers that continues to enthrall us, centuries after the last Viking longship sailed into history? Perhaps it's the allure of the untamed, the idea of tapping into a primal force that's both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Or maybe it's the timeless appeal of the underdog, of warriors who stood against the odds and etched their names into the annals of legend. But let's not forget the economic and political backdrop that played a pivotal role in both the rise and fall of the Berserkers. In a society where power dynamics shifted as often as the North Sea tides, the Berserkers were both pawns and players in the Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with plenty of axes. Their existence was as much about the economics of warfare as it was about personal glory. Chieftains and kings used them as weapons of war, but like all tools, their utility waned as the world changed around them. Despite their decline, the Berserkers' legacy is a testament to the enduring power of myth, a reminder of how stories can transcend time, shaping perceptions and inspiring generations. They embody a universal truth, that in the face of adversity, humanity has always turned to tales of strength and courage to make sense of the chaos. And while the Berserkers may have been larger than life, they were also deeply human, driven by the same desires and fears that resonate with us today. So, as we wrap up our saga, let's leave the Berserkers where they belong, on the cusp of history and legend, a reminder of an age when warriors roamed the earth, and stories were spun around flickering fires in the long, dark nights of the North. Their legacy is not just one of blood and fury, but of the enduring human spirit, the relentless pursuit of greatness, and the stories we tell to inspire and be remembered. As you drift off with these tales swirling in your mind, remember, history may be written by the victors, but legends are crafted by those who dare to live on the edge of the possible. In a world where modern Celtic art often gets reduced to decorative pub signs and the occasional tattoo, it's easy to overlook the fact that these designs have roots dug deep into the Iron Age, around 500 BC to be precise. Back when the Celtic tribes were more about crafting intricate art than darning kilts and playing the bagpipes. These folks were the Michelangelos of their time, minus the marble, and with a penchant for spirals and knots that would make your geometry teacher weep. Now, don't let Hollywood fool you into thinking the Celts were solely about swinging swords and shouting in the rain. Sure, they could hold their own in a skirmish, but their artistic skills were as sharp as their weaponry. Their art was like a silent language, a complex code woven into the fabric of their daily lives. Take those swirling spirals and interlocking knots. For example, far from being random doodles, these symbols were like ancient emojis loaded with meaning and status. Spirals, in particular, were the Celtic equivalent of "look how deep I am." They symbolized life, death, and everything in between, a cosmic Netflix series wrapped into a single loop. The Celts were nothing if not efficient in their metaphors. Knots, on the other hand, were all about eternity and interconnectedness. Think of them as the prehistoric LinkedIn, representing relationships and alliances that would make your head spin faster than the knots themselves. Art was a big deal for these tribes, and it wasn't just for the sake of aesthetics. It was a way of asserting power and prestige. You see, in Celtic society, owning a piece of finely crafted metalwork was the Iron Age equivalent of driving a brand new sports car. Those who could afford to commission intricate designs flaunted them like a badge of honor, a sign that they were a cut above the rest. And let's be real, who doesn't love a bit of social climbing? Now, about those myths. We've all heard the romantic tales of the mystical Celts, shrouded in mist and mystery. Sure, it's a lovely image, but let's not forget the harsh reality. Life in the Iron Age wasn't all about spiritual journeys and artistic pursuits. The Celts were navigating a world that was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. They lived in small, scattered communities, often battling for resources and territory. Their art, as mesmerizing as it was, reflected the complexities and struggles of their time. The harsh truth is that the artistic endeavors of the Celts weren't just about self-expression. They were also a matter of survival. Craftsmanship was a way to forge alliances, intimidate enemies, and secure a place in a society where status could mean the difference between thriving and barely surviving. In other words, those spirals and knots were as much about social strategy as they were about aesthetics. And speaking of social strategy, let's talk about the role of the elite. The Celtic chieftains and warriors weren't just leaders in battle, they were patrons of the arts. Commissioning elaborate designs wasn't just a personal indulgence, it was a political move. By investing in art, they were creating tangible expressions of power, drawing lines between themselves and the common folk. In a world where everything from your hairstyle to your pottery could signal your social standing, art was a crucial tool for maintaining control and influence. As we delve deeper into the world of Celtic art, remember that every swirl and knot tells a story. It's a narrative of a people who, despite the challenges of their time, found ways to express their identity, values, and aspirations. So next time you see a Celtic knot tattoo, think of it as more than just a pretty design. It's a nod to a bygone era when art was not only a form of expression, but a vital part of life itself. As we wade deeper into the mesmerizing tapestry of Celtic art, let's hit the road, figuratively speaking, and embark on their grand tour across ancient Europe. Picture a map with routes stretching from Brittany to the Balkans, each line a testament to the Celtic tribes' wanderlust and knack for cultural exchange. Now, back in those days, Europe wasn't exactly the backpacker-friendly continent it is today. No chic hostels or guides to help you navigate the terrain. Yet, the Celts, with their love for expansion and a good challenge, managed to leave their artistic fingerprints all over the place. You see, by the 4th century BC, these tribes were spreading faster than a viral meme. They moved into regions that are now modern-day France, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and even as far as the Iberian Peninsula. Their art evolved like a well-traveled Instagram influencer, each new region adding a distinct flair to their original style. This was no small feat. We're talking about a time when traveling 20 miles was like running a marathon, thanks to the lack of roads and the abundance of, well, everything that could kill you. And here comes the plot twist. As the Celts rubbed elbows with the Romans and Greeks, their art didn't just survive, it thrived. Now, if you think the Romans were too busy building aqueducts and overthrowing emperors to notice Celtic art, think again. They were both fascinated and appalled, much like someone discovering anchovy pizza for the first time. The Romans labeled the Celtic style as barbaric, which back then was the equivalent of calling it avant-garde. Yet, they couldn't resist borrowing a few tricks. Let's take a closer look at how these cultural mashups played out. When the Celts started interacting with the Greeks, they began incorporating more symmetry and balance into their art traits that the Greeks were obsessed with, as evidenced by their architecture and everything they did, really. It's like the Celts took a crash course in Greek aesthetics and passed with flying colors. This cross-pollination resulted in a blend of Celtic spirals and Greek geometry, a marriage of chaos and order that somehow worked. But hold on, the Romans weren't just passive admirers. They took it a step further, adopting Celtic techniques in metalwork and jewelry. Talk about cultural appropriation with a touch of irony. Roman soldiers were known to sport Celtic-inspired torques, those neck rings that screamed, "I mean business." These weren't just fashion statements. They were symbols of power and courage. Imagine a Roman soldier rocking a Celtic torque like a modern-day celebrity, flaunting the latest designer watch. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the term barbaric that the Romans loved to throw around. While they were busy using this label to dismiss Celtic art, they were simultaneously picking up design tips like a hipster at a vintage market. It's almost comedic how the Romans couldn't resist the allure of what they considered savage. It was like they were saying, "How dare you create such crude art? But also, can we borrow that for our next collection?" The Celts, on the other hand, were no strangers to borrowing a thing or two themselves. They were like cultural magpies, collecting shiny new ideas wherever they went. But they never lost their distinctive flair. Even as they borrowed techniques, they infused them with their own symbolism and style. It's as if they were saying, "Sure, we'll take your symmetry and raise you a spiral or two." Economically, this exchange was a boon. The Celts were not just artists, they were savvy traders. Their art became a commodity, a way to forge alliances and open trade routes. Think of it as an early form of cultural diplomacy, where a beautifully crafted piece could open doors and seal deals. And let's not forget the economic impact on the tribes themselves. Artisans who mastered these cross-cultural techniques found themselves in high demand, their skills as valuable as a stock portfolio in a bullish market. Yet, while the romantic image of Celts as cultural ambassadors is appealing, the reality was more complex. The expansion across Europe wasn't all smooth sailing. It was a time of conflict and competition, where survival often hinged on one's ability to adapt and innovate. Those intricate designs weren't just pretty patterns. They were a testament to resilience and ingenuity in a world where the stakes were as high as the ambitions of an influencer on social media. As we wrap up this part of the journey, let's keep in mind that the story of Celtic art is far from over. There's more to explore and debunk as we continue to unravel the threads of this ancient tapestry. For now, though, let's take a moment to appreciate the irony of a so-called barbaric culture influencing some of history's most civilized societies. It's a reminder that art and culture are as much about borrowing and blending as they are about creating. So, next time you see a Celtic-inspired Roman artifact, tip your hat to those ancient artists who knew how to make chaos and order dance together in perfect harmony. Let's shift gears and tackle one of the biggest urban legends in Celtic art, the classic Celtic cross. You know, the one that's supposedly been around since druids were the rock stars of the ancient world. Well, spoiler alert, it's not as ancient as you think. Before you start carving that timeless symbol into your front door, let's peel back the layers of history and see just where and when this cross really took off. Picture this. You're in the early Middle Ages, around the 8th century AD. The Celts are mingling with Christian missionaries who are spreading the good word far and wide, like ancient influencers with a gospel instead of a smartphone. The classic Celtic cross, a cross with a ring around the intersection, is a symbol that emerged from this cultural melting pot. Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't etched into stone by ancient druids under the light of a full moon. Instead, it was a clever piece of cultural fusion that combined Christian iconography with pre-existing Celtic designs. You see, when Christianity came knocking, it brought with it a whole new set of artistic rules. The Celts, not ones to be left behind, took this as an opportunity rather than a threat. They seamlessly blended the new symbolism with their traditional motifs, creating a hybrid art form that would have made even the most skeptical bishop do a double take. This was less about religious conversion and more about cultural survival. By adopting the Christian cross and infusing it with their own design elements, the Celts ensured their art remained relevant and, more importantly, safe from the iconoclastic tendencies of the time. Now, let's talk numbers. These stone crosses started popping up around the 8th century in regions like Ireland and Scotland, where the Celts were particularly adept at this artistic fusion. But here's the kicker. They weren't just religious markers. These crosses were also a nod to the Celts' knack for turning anything into a status symbol. Erecting a massive stone cross in your village was the medieval equivalent of planting a flag and saying, "We've made it." They were as much about social prestige as they were about spiritual devotion. Economically, this blending of symbols was a stroke of genius. The Celts had always been savvy traders. By incorporating Christian elements into their art, they opened new avenues for trade with the rest of Christian Europe. These hybrid symbols became hot commodities, much like a limited edition sneaker today. The artistry involved was not just a display of faith, but a demonstration of cultural adaptability that allowed the Celts to maintain their unique identity while embracing new influences. The Christianization of the Celts wasn't just a top-down affair, though. It didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't always peaceful. It was more of a gradual osmosis, with the clergy and local leaders negotiating the terms like seasoned diplomats. The Druids, those enigmatic figures who were the spiritual leaders of the Celts, weren't entirely sidelined. Instead, they found ways to coexist with the new faith. Some even embraced Christianity, seeing it as a natural evolution of their spiritual practice rather than a betrayal. This wasn't just about art, it was about survival. By weaving Christian symbols into their existing repertoire, the Celts preserved their cultural heritage while avoiding the wrath of a religious establishment that wasn't exactly known for its tolerance. It was a delicate balancing act, a testament to their ingenuity and pragmatism. The Celts were masters of adaptation, proving that sometimes the best way to preserve your culture is to let it evolve. And let's not forget the priests, who were more than happy to see their symbols gaining traction among the local populace. For them, this artistic blend was a win-win situation. It helped spread Christianity while simultaneously allowing the Celts to maintain their cultural integrity. It was like convincing someone to eat their vegetables by smothering them in cheese. everyone's happy. The Celtic cross, then, is more than just a symbol of faith. It's a testament to a people who knew how to navigate the choppy waters of cultural change. It represents a period in history when art was not just a form of expression, but a tool for negotiation, adaptation, and survival. So next time you see that iconic cross etched into stone or hanging around someone's neck, remember that it's a symbol of resilience and clever diplomacy, not just an ancient relic from a bygone era. As we continue to peel back the layers of Celtic art, we'll uncover more of these fascinating intersections between myth and reality. The Celts, like all great artists, were innovators who knew how to blend the old with the new, creating a rich tapestry of art that continues to captivate and inspire. There's still much more to explore, so stay tuned as we journey deeper into the enigmatic world of Celtic symbolism, where every knot and spiral tells a story of survival, adaptation, and cultural genius. Speaking of cultural genius, let's dive straight into the Celtic art economy, a bustling Iron Age business that went beyond mere decoration. Picture this. Celtic artisans weren't just whiling away their days carving pretty spirals for fun. No, they were the original small business owners, running an industry that was as much about survival as it was about aesthetics. Art wasn't just a passion project, it was a full-on economic engine. Let's start with the workforce. Creating those intricate designs was no one-man show. It took a village, literally. Skilled artisans, known as metalworkers, woodcarvers, and stonemasons, were the rock stars of their communities. In a time when you couldn't just pop down to the local craft store, these artists were in high demand, like the Iron Age version of a tech startup. They often worked in teams, with apprentices learning the ropes from masters who'd spent decades honing their craft. And let's talk numbers. A single piece of metalwork could take weeks, if not months, of laborious effort. Just imagine the hours spent crafting one torque, the iconic neck ring that was both a fashion statement and a status symbol. The cost of materials alone was significant. Iron, bronze, and gold were the holy trinity of Celtic art supplies, each with its own price tag. Gold, the bling of the ancient world, was as rare and coveted then as it is now. A torque made of gold could easily cost a small fortune, equivalent to several years' wages for a common laborer. Talk about an investment piece. But where did all this bling end up? Mostly around the necks of the elite. Chieftains and tribal leaders flaunted their ornate jewelry like modern CEOs flaunt their stock options. These pieces weren't just decorative, they were wearable wealth, symbols of power that could be passed down through generations or used as diplomatic gifts to seal alliances. And let's not forget the trade routes. Celtic art was a hot commodity, fueling a network of trade that stretched across Europe. Picture bustling marketplaces where local artisans traded their wares for exotic goods from far-off lands. Celtic designs found their way into all corners of the continent, from the hills of Ireland to the plains of Hungary. These exchanges weren't just about economics. They were cultural exchanges, with art serving as the universal language. But here's where the myth-busting comes in. While it's tempting to romanticize this as a peaceful exchange of ideas and goods, the reality was a bit more brutal. Trade often came hand-in-hand with conflict. Picture two tribes at a standoff, each eyeing the other's resources. Art and artifacts could be spoils of war as much as trade goods, with victorious tribes carting off the defeated's treasures to display as trophies. Yet, despite the bloodshed, art persisted as a cultural lifeline. And nowhere is this more evident than in the tombs of the elite. Burial sites across Europe reveal a treasure trove of Celtic art, each object a testament to the deceased's wealth and status. These tombs were like ancient time capsules, filled with everything a person might need in the afterlife, from weapons and jewelry to household items, all intricately decorated. It was the ultimate send-off, a way to ensure that status and wealth followed you into eternity. The cost of these funerary extravaganzas, astronomical. Entire communities might contribute to the construction of a chieftain's tomb, with resources pooled to create a burial worthy of their leader's stature. It was an investment in the tribe's future, a demonstration of loyalty and unity that would hopefully curry favor with the gods. But let's not get too misty-eyed. These grand tombs also served as a stark reminder of the social hierarchy. The artistry that adorned the elite's final resting places was a clear message. In life and death, there was a distinct line between the haves and the have-nots. And while the common folk might have admired these works, they were often left with little more than simple, functional items to accompany them on their journey to the great beyond. In the end, Celtic art was more than just a feast for the eyes. It was an intricate web of economic systems, social structures, and cultural exchanges. From the workshops of skilled artisans to the lavish tombs of the elite, every piece told a story of a society that valued art as much as survival itself. As we continue to unravel the layers of Celtic history, let's remember that behind every spiral and knot lies a tale of ambition, power, and the eternal dance between art and life. Stay tuned, because the world of Celtic art still has more secrets to reveal. As we journey into the next chapter, we'll delve deeper into the multifaceted tapestry of a civilization that knew how to blend beauty with practicality and myth with reality. So, as we dig into the Celtic art legacy, let's kick off by confronting the elephant, or should I say the druid, in the room, the romanticized image of Celts as mystical forest dwellers communing with nature while crafting exquisite designs by moonlight. Now, I hate to burst any bubble-wrapped fantasies, but these folks were more about spreadsheets and trade agreements than tree-hugging and chanting. First off, let's talk about those trading routes. The Celts were the Iron Age's answer to Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. By 300 BC, they were already trading their art like hot commodities across Europe, from the British Isles to Asia Minor. And we're not just talking about trinkets. Entire economies were built on the exchange of Celtic metalwork, textiles, and ceramics. If the Celts were still around, they'd probably be running multinational corporations and dominating the art market faster than you can say initial public offering. Now, let's tackle the myth of the solitary Celtic artist, inspired by the Whispering Woods. The reality is more akin to a bustling workshop full of artisans who knew their way around a ledger as much as a chisel. These workshops were the beating heart of their communities, employing scores of artisans who produced everything from intricate patterns to practical tools. Forget the romantic notion of the solitary genius. This was a group project on steroids, with economic incentives driving creativity as much as artistic passion. Speaking of artistry, Celtic designs have seeped into modern aesthetics like a dye into fabric. From corporate logos to jewelry trends, you can spot Celtic influence in the most unexpected places. Take the iconic spiral and knot designs. Today, they grace everything from wedding rings to corporate branding. The reason? They symbolize continuity and interconnectedness, values as relevant now in our digital age as they were in the ancient world. Celtic knots might just be the original networking tool, long before LinkedIn made it fashionable. Now, let's flip the script and investigate what we still get wrong about these ancient artisans. Many picture the Celts as being closer to nature than civilization, which is a bit like saying a Wall Street broker is more about the trees in Central Park than the stock exchange. The Celts were sophisticated players in a high-stakes game of survival and commerce. While we like to imagine them as mystical, they were more likely figuring out how to supply their next batch of bronze or iron before the next market boom or bust. And while we're busting myths, let's address the so-called barbaric label slapped on Celtic art by the Romans. Sure, the Romans came, saw, and left Yelp reviews that would have made any Celt chuckle, but this so-called barbarism was just a failure to appreciate a different aesthetic. Celtic art was less about symmetry and more about capturing the essence of life's chaos. In a way, it's the ancient equivalent of abstract expressionism, wild, unrestrained, and deeply symbolic. So why does Celtic art endure? Because it speaks to something elemental in the human experience. It's a testament to resilience, a visual narrative of a people who adapted, innovated, and thrived despite the odds. Even as empires rose and fell, the Celts found ways to imprint their identity on the world, stitching their culture into the very fabric of European history. Today, Celtic art continues to captivate us because it embodies a spirit of resistance and ingenuity that resonates across the centuries. To wrap up, if you're going to take one thing away from our deep dive into Celtic art, let it be this. The Celts were not just artisans weaving pretty patterns in some enchanted forest. They were savvy strategists, cultural ambassadors, and economic powerhouses. Their art wasn't just ornamental. It was a language, a currency, and a weapon in one. So next time you find yourself admiring a Celtic design, remember that behind every swirl and knot is a legacy of ingenuity and survival. An art form that has not only stood the test of time, but has shaped it. That's the real magic of Celtic art, and why it continues to inspire and influence even in our modern age. Sicily, the sun-drenched pebble in the boot of Italy, has always been something of a historical marsh pit. You see, in the early days, it wasn't so much a kingdom as it was history's favorite Mediterranean melting pot. And by melting pot, I mean the kind of kitchen disaster you'd expect from a cooking show where everyone has a different recipe and nobody's read the instructions. The island played host to a chaotic parade of Greek settlers, Carthaginian merchants, and Roman conquerors, each with their own vision of paradise and their own brand of chaos. First on the scene, around the 8th century BC, were the Greeks, who looked at Sicily and thought, this is perfect for our next big idea, city-states. And so they went ahead and planted colonies like Naxos and Syracuse, the latter of which would become one of the most powerful Greek cities in the ancient world. By the way, Syracuse wasn't just your run-of-the-mill city. It was the Renaissance Florence of its day, with tyrants who aspired to be both warlords and patrons of the arts. Seriously, one of the tyrants, Dionysius I, was known for his poetry as well as his paranoia. Think of him as a cross between a literary critic and a military dictator. Meanwhile, the Carthaginians were cruising over from North Africa, attracted by Sicily's strategic location and fertile land. They were the ancient equivalent of business travelers, setting up trading posts and making deals faster than you can say Phoenician alphabet. By the way, if you ever wondered who really invented the alphabet, the Carthaginians' ancestors, the Phoenicians, have a pretty strong case. Anyway, Sicily's coastal cities became bustling hubs of trade, full of exotic goods, and naturally, a fair amount of espionage and double-dealing. It was like an ancient episode of Game of Thrones, but with more olives and fewer dragons. But what about the locals, you ask? Sicily's original inhabitants, the Sicels, Sicani, and Elymians, watched this influx of new neighbors with what I imagine was a blend of curiosity and concern. They were the original Sicilians, the people who farmed the land and fished the seas long before anyone else thought Sicily was prime real estate. They must have wondered when their island turned into the ancient world's busiest port of call. And then there were the Romans. Ah, Rome. By the 3rd century BC, the Romans had decided that Sicily, with its strategic position smack dab in the middle of the Mediterranean, was too good to pass up. The First Punic War, 264-241 BC, was essentially a spat between Rome and Carthage over who got to keep this Mediterranean jewel. Spoiler alert, Rome won, and Sicily became its first province outside the Italian peninsula. Cue the Roman legions marching in, with their sandals and stern faces, bringing roads, baths, and a brand new tax system. Think of them as the original public works department, if the department also conquered you. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate this patchwork quilt of cultures. You had Greek temples, Carthaginian trading outposts, and Roman roads all competing for space on the same island. It was like someone took a history textbook and shook it until all the pages got mixed up. And yet, out of this chaos emerged a unique Sicilian identity, a cultural cocktail that would eventually set the stage for the rise of the Kingdom of Sicily. But before we get there, let's talk about why all these powers were so obsessed with Sicily. Sure, it had beautiful beaches and a climate that would make any snowbird drool, but there was more at play. Sicily was the breadbasket of the ancient world, a fertile paradise that could produce the grain needed to feed armies and fuel empires. It was also a naval linchpin, a stepping stone for anyone looking to control the Mediterranean trade routes. So, while the island's appeal might sound romantic, it was really its economic and strategic value that had everyone fighting over it like kids in a sandbox. In this cultural cauldron, myths were born alongside the harsh realities of conquest and colonization. Take the legend of Daedalus, for example. According to some versions, after engineering the famous escape from Crete with his wax wings, Daedalus ended up in Sicily. It's a great story, but the truth is, Sicily's real architects were the ones building those massive Greek temples and Roman amphitheaters, which still stand today as testament to their engineering prowess. Sicily's early history is a testament to the messy, beautiful chaos of cultural exchange. It was a place where Greek philosophers, Carthaginian traders, and Roman soldiers all left their mark. And while they might have come for different reasons, whether it was the pursuit of knowledge, wealth, or power, they all contributed to the island's rich tapestry. Each group left behind traces of their language, their customs, and their architecture, like archaeological breadcrumbs leading us through a maze of history. So, the next time you think of Sicily, remember it's not just a picturesque island with great canali. It's a living museum of ancient ambition, a monument to the people and powers who once vied for its shores. And as we move forward in our story, we'll see how this chaotic beginning paved the way for the rise of a kingdom that would capture the world's imagination. But that's a tale for another day, or night, if you're the kind to ponder history as a lullaby. As the curtain rises on our next act, let's welcome the Normans to the Sicilian stage. Yes, those Norsemen who decided the icy fjords of Scandinavia weren't quite their speed. They packed up their longships, took a scenic detour through France, and eventually found themselves basking in the Mediterranean sun. They'd been on quite a journey, and by the time they reached Sicily, they were less about raiding for loot and more about establishing a power base. Talk about a career change. Picture this. It's the 11th century, and the Mediterranean is a bit like the Wild West, minus the tumbleweeds, but with just as many power grabs. Enter Roger I, a Norman adventurer who saw Sicily not just as a stepping stone, but as potential empire material. Now, Roger wasn't your average Viking descendant. He was savvy, ambitious, and he came armed with more than just a sword. He brought a vision, a plan to turn Sicily into a fortress of prosperity in the middle of the sea. Roger's arrival in Sicily in 1061 was the medieval equivalent of a hostile corporate takeover. He landed with a band of knights ready to transform this pirate's playground into a Norman stronghold. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good underdog story? He wasn't just battling pirates and rival lords. He was up against the Byzantine Greeks, the Muslim Arabs, and anyone else who fancied a slice of Sicilian pie. It was like trying to host a dinner party with guests who all have different dietary restrictions and weapons. The Normans were nothing if not opportunistic. They saw the fractured political landscape of Sicily as an invitation, not a deterrent. The island was a patchwork of small, bickering states, which made it ripe for the picking. Roger's strategy was simple but effective: divide and conquer. He played local rulers off against each other, a real-life version of chess where the stakes were kingdoms and castles. And boy, did he know how to play. Roger's conquest wasn't just about brute force, though. He was a master of medieval PR. By marrying Judith of Evru, a noblewoman with her own impressive connections, he secured alliances that brought him legitimacy and support. Think of it as the original power couple strategy, except instead of Instagram followers, they were gaining knights and territories. But it wasn't all glamorous battles and strategic marriages. Turning Sicily into a powerhouse required infrastructure. Roger understood that controlling Sicily meant controlling its economy. The island was the breadbasket of the region, and Roger had plans to squeeze every last grain of opportunity from it. He improved agriculture, established fairer taxation, and opened up trade routes. It was a masterclass in medieval economics, turning Sicily into a cash cow that could fund further conquests. And what about the cultural cocktail that was Sicily? Roger was smart enough to see the benefits of this diverse mix. Instead of imposing a single culture, he encouraged a hybrid society where Greek, Arab, and Latin influences could coexist. It was like he was running a historical experiment in multiculturalism. The result, a vibrant, cosmopolitan society that was as much about intellectual pursuits as it was about military might. Sicily under Norman rule became a beacon of learning and culture, attracting scholars, artists, and traders from across the Mediterranean. Now, let's not get too carried away with romantic notions. Roger's reign wasn't just a peaceful coexistence of cultures. It was built on a foundation of strategic marriages, military campaigns, and political maneuvering. The man was a Norman knight, after all, not a 21st century diplomat, but his ability to blend cultures and foster economic prosperity was nothing short of revolutionary for the time. And then there was the architecture. Oh, the architecture. Roger and his Norman successors left behind some of the most stunning examples of Arab Norman culture. The palaces and churches they built were adorned with intricate mosaics and ornate stonework, blending Islamic, Byzantine, and Romanesque styles. Take the Palatine Chapel in Palermo, for instance, a masterpiece of multicultural design that stands as a testament to Raja's vision. If walls could talk, they'd probably tell tales of knights and scholars sharing a glass of wine over heated debates about philosophy and strategy. Raja I passed away in 1101, but he left behind a legacy that would shape Sicily for centuries. Under his rule, the island transformed from a fragmented collection of territories into a cohesive, prosperous state. It was a medieval success story, a testament to what could be achieved with a little ambition, a lot of strategy, and the occasional sword fight. So there you have it, the tale of how a Norman adventurer turned Sicily from a pirate's den into a Mediterranean marvel. But the story doesn't end here. Oh no, the Kingdom of Sicily still had its sights set on greater things. There were more challenges to face, more power dynamics to navigate, and more cultural fusions to create. Stay tuned, because the Normans are just getting started in this sun-drenched saga of conquest and culture. Raja I had set the stage, but it was his son, Raja Roman II, who cranked the volume up to 11, turning Sicily from a rising star into a full-blown medieval rock concert. You know the type. The kind of king who could strut onto the historical stage with a crown slightly askew and a swagger that said, "Welcome to my kingdom," where the Mediterranean's heartbeat echoes from every corner. Born in 1095, just 6 years before his father's death, Raja Roman II took the throne in 1130 and didn't just rule Sicily. He transformed it into the medieval world's envy. Think of him as the Steve Jobs of kings, turning a motley collection of cultures into a cohesive powerhouse, all while wearing the 12th century equivalent of a turtleneck and jeans. So, how did he pull off this feat? Well, Raja Roman II was a master of the medieval balancing act. His court was a multicultural marvel, like a potluck dinner where everyone actually gets along. You had Greek scholars, Arab scientists, and Latin theologians all rubbing elbows and sharing ideas. It was a bit like the United Nations, if the UN also had to deal with the occasional sword fight over the hummus. Raja's court wasn't just about pomp and pageantry, it was a genuine intellectual hub. He invited scholars from across the known world, creating a vibrant atmosphere of learning and innovation. Now, you might wonder how he managed to keep the peace in such a diverse kingdom. Spoiler alert. It involved a lot of negotiating and very few decapitations. Raja's diplomatic prowess was legendary. He was like a medieval maestro, orchestrating alliances and treaties with the finesse of a seasoned conductor. He knew that a kingdom divided by cultural and religious lines was a powder keg waiting to explode. So, instead of playing the tyrant, he played the diplomat, ensuring that each community felt valued and heard. This wasn't just some hippie dream of peace and love. It was a calculated strategy that kept Sicily stable and prosperous. Speaking of prosperity, let's talk about the economy. Raja wasn't content to let Sicily's fertile lands and strategic location do all the heavy lifting. Oh no, he had grand plans for his kingdom's coffers. He established a centralized system of administration that would make even the most efficient Swiss watch envious. By standardizing weights and measures, and implementing a uniform coinage, Raja streamlined trade and commerce. This wasn't just medieval micromanagement, it was economic genius. Under his reign, Sicilian ports buzzed with activity, becoming the Mediterranean's trading hotspots. Goods flowed in from the east and west, bringing wealth and influence that made other European kingdoms green with envy. And then there's the architecture. Oh, the architecture. Raja Roman II was an aesthete with an eye for grandeur. His reign saw the construction of some of Sicily's most iconic structures, like the Cathedral of Cefalu and the Madorana Church. These weren't just buildings, they were statements. Imagine walking into a cathedral that combined Norman strength with Arabic elegance and Byzantine opulence. It was as if Raja commissioned each structure to whisper, "Behold the kingdom where cultures converge." These architectural wonders weren't just eye candy. They were the physical manifestation of Raja's vision of a united, multicultural Sicily. But let's not get too swept away in the romance of it all. Raja's reign wasn't without its challenges. The man had to deal with rebellions, power struggles, and the occasional pesky pope. Yep, nothing like a papal bull to throw a wrench into your plans. In 1130, Pope Innocent Roman II excommunicated Raja, a political move that was more about power dynamics than divine displeasure. Raja responded with the medieval equivalent of a diplomatic middle finger by maintaining his control and even expanding his influence into North Africa and the Italian mainland. And let's not forget the daily grind of ruling a kingdom. Raja was a hands-on monarch who understood that a king's job wasn't just about wearing crowns and hosting banquets. It was about leadership, vision, and sometimes a bit of tough love. He had to be both the benevolent father figure and the stern taskmaster, ensuring that his realm ran like a well-oiled machine. His ability to balance these roles was nothing short of remarkable, a testament to his political acumen and charisma. Now, let's take a moment to debunk some myths. It's easy to romanticize Raja's reign as a golden age of peace and prosperity, but the reality was far more complex. The multicultural harmony was hard-won, the result of constant negotiation and compromise. The architectural marvels didn't just spring up overnight. They were the product of meticulous planning and resources. And while Raja's economic policies were innovative, they also required the support of a compliant and sometimes overburdened population. His reign was as much about managing expectations as it was about realizing dreams. So there you have it. Raja Roman II, the rock star king who turned Sicily into the medieval world's envy. He wasn't just a ruler. He was a visionary who saw the potential in diversity, the power of diplomacy, and the importance of economic savvy. His legacy is etched into Sicily's landscape, its culture, and its history, a testament to what can be achieved when ambition meets opportunity. But don't think for a second that the story ends here. There are still more chapters to unravel in this fascinating saga of conquest and culture. So stick around, because the Kingdom of Sicily is just warming up. As the Kingdom of Sicily basked in the glow of Raja Roman II visionary reign, it wasn't all sunshine and medieval rainbows. The island soon found itself caught in a political tug-of-war that would make any soap opera look like child's play. With Raja Roman II passing in 1154, the kingdom was left like a beautifully orchestrated symphony missing its conductor, leaving the stage wide open for the next act of political melodrama. Enter the Holy Roman Empire and the papacy, two powerhouses eyeing Sicily like vultures over a particularly juicy carcass. The Holy Roman emperors saw Sicily as a key piece in their quest for European dominance, while the popes, ever the spiritual landlords of medieval Europe, weren't keen on letting Sicily slip into the clutches of an empire that might challenge their papal supremacy. It's like they were playing a high-stakes game of chess, except the pieces were entire kingdoms, and the stakes were eternal salvation, or so they claimed. Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor with a name as fiery as his ambition, looked southward with a gleam in his eye. He was determined to extend his imperial reach all the way to the Mediterranean, and Sicily was the crown jewel that would complete his collection. Meanwhile, the papacy, under Pope Adrian Roman IV, was playing its own game of strategy. The popes weren't just concerned with spiritual matters. They were medieval power brokers who knew that controlling Sicily meant a firm grip on the central Mediterranean. Now, as if the external threats weren't enough, Sicily had its own internal dramas to contend with. The kingdom was a tapestry of cultures, Greek, Arab, Norman, and Latin, each with its own ambitions and agendas. It was like trying to mediate a family reunion where everyone brought their own idea of dessert, and no one could agree on the main course. The result? A kingdom constantly teetering on the brink of internal discord, with nobles vying for power and influence, each hoping to carve out a piece of Raja Roman II legacy for themselves. Amidst this swirling storm of potential chaos, William I, son of Raja Roman II, took the throne. Known as William the Bad, a nickname that suggests his publicist might have been on holiday, he had big shoes to fill, and no shortage of critics ready to point out when he stumbled. William's reign from 1154 to 1166 was less about grand visions and more about keeping the ship afloat in turbulent waters. It turns out, maintaining a multicultural kingdom in the face of external and internal pressures isn't as easy as it looks on the medieval brochure. Under William's rule, Sicily faced a series of revolts and conspiracies, with the Sicilian nobility more than happy to stir the pot. In 1160, a particularly spicy rebellion erupted, led by disgruntled barons who probably thought they could do a better job at ruling. William's response was swift and brutal, quashing the revolt like a medieval game of whack-a-mole. But the unrest was a sign of things to come, a harbinger of the challenges that lay ahead for the kingdom. And then there was the economic reality. Sicily's prosperity relied heavily on its agricultural output and vibrant trade networks. But with political instability came economic uncertainty. Trade routes that once thrived under Raja Roman II's watchful eye now faced threats from piracy and shifting alliances. It was like watching a well-oiled machine start to sputter, with every political tremor sending ripples through the kingdom's economy. Let's not forget the cultural tensions simmering beneath the surface. William tried to maintain the multicultural harmony his father had championed, but it was a delicate balancing act. The Greek and Arab communities, integral to Sicily's unique character, found themselves increasingly sidelined as Latin influences grew stronger. It was the medieval version of a cultural identity crisis, with each group trying to assert its place in a rapidly changing kingdom. Meanwhile, the papacy was busy weaving its web of influence. Pope Adrian Roman IV, the only English pope in history, saw an opportunity to assert papal authority over Sicily. He issued papal bulls like they were going out of style, each one a reminder that the popes were watching and ready to pull the strings if necessary. It was a classic power move, the kind that would make even the most seasoned politician nod in appreciation. And let's not overlook the Holy Roman Empire's maneuvers. Frederick Barbarossa wasn't about to let Sicily slip through his fingers without a fight. He forged alliances with disgruntled Sicilian nobles, playing the long game in a bid to bring the kingdom under his sway. It was a diplomatic dance, with Barbarossa leading and Sicily's fate hanging in the balance. As the 12th century drew to a close, Sicily found itself caught in the crosshairs of these formidable powers. The kingdom was like a ship navigating stormy seas, with William I at the helm, trying to steer a course through treacherous waters. But the political and economic pressures proved formidable, and the strains of maintaining a multicultural kingdom began to show. With William's death in 1166, the kingdom passed to his son, William Roman II, aptly nicknamed William the Good, possibly as a PR move to contrast with his father's less flattering moniker. William Roman II's reign offered a brief respite from the political turbulence, a chance for Sicily to catch its breath before the next storm rolled in. But even his relatively peaceful rule couldn't completely shield the kingdom from the brewing tensions that surrounded it. The Holy Roman Empire, the papacy, and the internal dynamics of the Sicilian court all played their part in shaping the kingdom's fate. It was a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and ambitions, each thread pulling Sicily in different directions. The kingdom's fortunes ebbed and flowed with the political tides, a testament to the challenges of maintaining power in a world where everyone wanted a piece of the Sicilian pie. And so, as the stage was set for the next act in Sicily's saga, the kingdom stood at a crossroads. The political rollercoaster was far from over, and the challenges that lay ahead would test the mettle of its rulers and the resilience of its people. The kingdom of Sicily, a beacon of cultural fusion and economic prosperity, was about to embark on yet another chapter in its storied history. So buckle up, because this Mediterranean drama is only just beginning. Stay tuned for the next twist in this epic tale of power, politics, and perseverance. And so, the kingdom of Sicily found itself teetering on the edge of a historical cliff, with one foot dangling over the abyss of decline. It was a tough gig trying to juggle the ambitions of the Holy Roman Empire, the papal power plays, and the internal squabbles of a culturally diverse kingdom. Picture a juggler on a tightrope, trying to keep flaming swords in the air, while the audience below debates whether to cut the rope. That was Sicily under William Roman II, and the kingdom's heavy crown had never felt more precarious. But let's not just blame external forces for Sicily's woes. The kingdom had its fair share of political missteps, too. For starters, the royal succession didn't exactly follow a neat and tidy script. When William Roman II died childless in 1189, it sparked a succession crisis that was about as welcome as a hornet's nest at a picnic. Enter Tancred of Lex, a man with a claim to the throne that was about as solid as a sandcastle in high tide. Tancred's reign, lasting until 1194, was a masterclass in political chaos, with rival factions at each other's throats, and the kingdom's stability as elusive as a Sicilian summer breeze. Meanwhile, let's talk about the economy. Sicily's golden age of trade and agriculture was starting to tarnish, and not just because of a few bad harvests. The once bustling trade networks that Raja Roman II and his successors had championed were fraying at the edges. Piracy was on the rise, making Mediterranean trade a risky venture, like trying to navigate a minefield with a blindfold on. The kingdom's coffers, once overflowing with the spoils of commerce, were now echoing with the hollow sound of dwindling resources. And then, as if the universe had a cruel sense of irony, the Holy Roman Empire decided it was time to make its move. Enter Henry VI, the emperor with a penchant for expanding his empire the way some people collect stamps. In 1194, Henry invaded Sicily, claiming the throne through his wife, Constance, who just so happened to be the daughter of Raja Roman II. It was a bold move, akin to crashing a party and declaring yourself the host. But Henry's claim was backed by military might, and Sicily, exhausted from internal strife and economic woes, was in no position to resist. The conquest of Sicily by the Holy Roman Empire marked the beginning of the kingdom's absorption into larger empires. With Henry's triumph, Sicily was no longer the independent powerhouse it once was, but rather a prized jewel in the empire's crown. It was a bittersweet end to Sicily's reign as a sovereign kingdom, one that had punched well above its weight in the medieval world. But let's not sound the death knell just yet. Sicily's legacy was far from lost. The island's impact on European culture and cuisine was like a secret ingredient in a recipe, subtle but transformative. The architectural marvels left behind by the Normans, those stunning cathedrals and palaces adorned with intricate mosaics and ornate stonework, stood as testament to a bygone era of cultural fusion. These structures, blending Norman, Arab, and Byzantine styles, became UNESCO World Heritage Sites centuries later, a nod to their enduring significance. And then there's the food. Sicilian cuisine is a testament to the island's diverse cultural tapestry, with influences from the Greeks, Arabs, and Normans simmering together to create dishes that are nothing short of culinary poetry. If you've ever savored a plate of pasta alla norma or indulged in cannoli, you've tasted the legacy of a kingdom that knew how to blend flavors as deftly as it blended cultures. The intellectual contributions of Sicily's golden age also left a lasting mark. The kingdom once boasted a court where Greek philosophers, Arab mathematicians, and Latin theologians exchanged ideas with the kind of fervor usually reserved for sports fans on game day. This vibrant intellectual atmosphere helped lay the groundwork for the Renaissance, a period that would see Europe's cultural and scientific horizons expand beyond imagination. Yet, it's important to recognize that the romanticized vision of Sicily as a harmonious melting pot glosses over the tensions and struggles that simmered beneath the surface. The multicultural harmony was often a delicate balance, with moments of cooperation punctuated by episodes of conflict. The legacy of Sicily isn't just about the beauty of its monuments or the flavors of its cuisine. It's also a story of resilience in the face of adversity, of a kingdom that navigated the treacherous waters of politics and power with a mix of ambition and adaptability. As the Kingdom of Sicily became part of the Holy Roman Empire, it transitioned into a new chapter of its history. The island would continue to play a significant role in the Mediterranean theater, albeit under different rulers and influences. Its strategic position ensured that Sicily remained a coveted prize, and its cultural contributions continued to ripple through the annals of European history. So, as we bid farewell to this medieval powerhouse, let's remember that history is a tapestry woven from the threads of triumph and tragedy, of legends and harsh realities. Sicily's story is a reminder that even the mightiest of kingdoms can face decline, but their legacies can endure in ways that transcend the passage of time. It's a testament to the enduring power of culture, the resilience of human spirit, and the beauty of a well-crafted cannoli. In the end, the Kingdom of Sicily may have been absorbed into larger empires, but its impact is etched into the very fabric of European history, echoing through the ages like a symphony that refuses to be silenced. If you ever thought your family was a bit dysfunctional, spare a thought for young Nero, the future emperor of Rome. His childhood wasn't exactly the golden tale of innocence and laughter that one might imagine. Instead, It was more like an ancient version of Succession, with less corporate jargon and more assassination attempts. Born Lucius Domitius Ahenarbarbus in 37 AD, Nero was the product of a union that was less about love and more about political scheming. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, was a power broker with ambitions sharper than a Roman dagger, while his father, Gnaeus Domitius Ahenarbarbus, was known more for his scandalous lifestyle than any paternal warmth. Let's not sugarcoat it. Nero's family tree was a gnarled mess of ambition and betrayal. His uncle, Caligula, was the emperor with a reputation so infamous that even the most outrageous Netflix series would struggle to do him justice. Caligula's idea of governance included making his horse a consul and turning the Roman Senate into his personal circus. So, Nero was already off to an auspicious start with role models like these. The real orchestrator behind Nero's rise, however, was his mother, Agrippina. She was a woman who knew how to play the long game, and by long, I mean she was willing to wait through a few murders and marriages to get her son onto the throne. When Nero was just 2 years old, his father died, leaving Agrippina to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics virtually alone. She did what any ambitious Roman woman would do. She married her own uncle, Emperor Claudius. Yes, you heard that right. In 49 AD, she married Claudius, a man who was both the emperor and her uncle, effectively making Nero next in line for the throne. Talk about keeping it in the family. Now, let's bust a myth or two. Nero's early years weren't spent in opulent palaces being pampered by servants. Instead, after Agrippina fell out of favor with Caligula, Nero was sent away to live with his aunt, Domitia Lepida. There, he led a life that was more humble than one might expect for a future emperor. Forget golden cradles. Think more along the lines of musty Roman villas and a modest lifestyle. His mother's exile, thanks to her brother Caligula's whims, meant Nero was far from the heart of power in those formative years. By the time Nero was a teenager, the Game of Thrones was getting serious. Agrippina returned from exile when Caligula was assassinated by his own Praetorian Guard, no less, and Claudius took the reins of power. Agrippina, ever the strategist, convinced Claudius to adopt Nero, thus positioning him as a successor ahead of Claudius's own biological son, Britannicus. Talk about playing favorites. With a bit of persuasion, and possibly some poison, Claudius was out of the picture by 54 AD, leaving Nero to ascend to the throne at the tender age of 16. It's easy to imagine Nero's early days as emperor as a whirlwind of toga parties and chariot races, but the reality was more complex, was thrust into a world of political intrigue and power plays, a teenage emperor surrounded by seasoned senators and scheming courtiers. It was like being the new kid in a school where everyone else is a seasoned politician with a penchant for backstabbing. Despite the chaos, Nero had a flair for the dramatic even before he officially donned the purple toga. One of the more eyebrow-raising anecdotes from his youth involves his love for the arts. Nero fancied himself a performer, particularly enjoying the lyre and theatrical performances. It might seem quaint now, but back in Roman times, an emperor taking the stage was akin to a modern-day president moonlighting as a stand-up comedian, unexpected and slightly scandalous. And let's not forget the whispers of Agrippina's influence. She was the puppet master behind the scenes, pulling the strings to ensure Nero's reign remained secure. It's said that she would sit behind a curtain during Senate meetings, advising Nero on decisions. The young emperor was under her thumb, and everyone knew it. But this relationship was a double-edged sword. Agrippina's power made her a target, and the mother-son dynamic was more Game of Thrones than Brady Bunch. While Nero's ascent to power seemed like a meteoric rise, it was built on a foundation of political maneuvering and familial manipulation. The real story of his youth is far from the gilded narrative often imagined. It's a tale of survival in a world where family ties were both a blessing and a curse. In the end, Nero's early life was a testament to the ruthless nature of Roman politics, where even a teenager could be caught in a web of ambition and betrayal. Not exactly the stuff of bedtime stories, but certainly a captivating saga of history's most notorious emperor-to-be. Nero's inauguration as emperor was like a Roman version of a grand opening sale at the local Colosseum. Everyone was eager to see what the new guy would bring to the table. Initially, Nero was a hit. His reign began in 54 AD, and the good citizens of Rome were ready to embrace their teenage ruler, if only for the novelty of it all. You see, Nero kicked off his rule with what many historians refer to as the Golden Age of Reforms, when taxes were lowered and public welfare improved. It was as if he'd been handed the script for how to win friends and influence Romans. Imagine this, a teenage emperor who actually listened to his advisors. Shocking, right? This early success wasn't just a fluke. It was orchestrated with the help of a dream team of advisors, including the philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus. Think of them as the original political spin doctors, crafting policies that made Nero look like the golden boy of Roman rule. Together, they reduced taxes, granted more autonomy to the Senate, and even banned capital punishment, which was a big deal in an era where executions were as common as a trip to the baths. But oh, the drama. Nero had a flair for it, and his public works projects were where he really shone, or at least he thought he did. Take, for instance, the grandiose Domus Aurea, or the Golden House, which was less a home and more a sprawling palace complex. This was Nero's attempt at turning Rome into his personal playground, complete with opulent gardens, a man-made lake, and even rooms decorated in gold leaf and precious stones. Again, think more along the lines of a reality show mansion than a humble abode. The Romans, however, weren't just dealing with a burgeoning architectural wonderland. They were footing the bill for Nero's indulgences. The cost of his projects was astronomical, measured in millions of sesterces, and it was their tax money that was being funneled into these golden dreams. The Romans were left to ponder if their taxes were being spent on public benefit or merely Nero's vanity projects. Spoiler alert, it was mostly the latter. While the public works were a spectacle to behold, it was Nero's passion for the arts that really set him apart. He fancied himself a musician and actor, and he wasn't shy about sharing his talents, or lack thereof, with anyone who would listen. Picture an emperor who thought he was the Roman version of Elvis, but more toga and less hip swivel. His performances were mandatory events, and while his subjects might have preferred the lions and gladiators, they were instead treated to Nero's lyre solos and dramatic recitations. The real cost of these performances, though, wasn't just in patience, but in the political capital. Senators and citizens alike were expected to praise Nero's artistic merits, even if their ears said otherwise. This led to a kind of forced enthusiasm, with everyone clapping a little too hard to avoid the emperor's wrath. It's the ancient equivalent of liking your boss's Instagram post, even if you couldn't care less about their latest vacation. But let's not forget the elephant in the Roman forum, the senators. While Nero was busy turning Rome into his personal stage, the Senate was left clutching their togas, trying to figure out where they fit into this new regime. Nero's reforms initially seemed to empower the Senate, giving them more autonomy. But as his reign progressed, it became clear that his need for control and attention often left them sidelined and seething. The senators were torn between their traditional roles and Nero's demands for adulation. Imagine a room full of stern-faced politicians forced to sit through yet another of Nero's dramatic readings. Not exactly their idea of governance. Some of them likely wondered if they'd be better off in the Colosseum themselves, facing down a lion or two. The costs of Nero's reign extended far beyond the financial. His ambitious projects and theatrical pursuits began to strain the sanity of those around him. As his golden visions for Rome expanded, it became increasingly clear that Nero's sense of reality was slipping. The city became a backdrop for his whims, and anyone who dared to criticize was swiftly dealt with. Nero's early reign was a paradox, a time of genuine reform mixed with self-indulgence and a disconnect from reality. The initial promise of a golden era was overshadowed by the realization that the emperor's dreams were becoming increasingly detached from the needs of his people. And yet, for a while, the allure of his ambitions kept Rome captivated. Nero's story is one of contrasts. He began with promise, surrounded by wise counsel, only to gradually lose himself in the opulence of his own making. His early reign was a balancing act between genuine reforms and the excesses of his grand projects, a time when the line between ruler and performer became increasingly blurred. As the stage was set for the next act of his life, the echoes of lyres and the clinking of sesterces hinted at the drama yet to come. As Nero's extravagant fantasies blurred the lines between ruler and performer, the stage was set for the most infamous act of his reign, the Great Fire of Rome. Picture it. July 18, 64 AD, Rome wrapped in the kind of sweltering heat that makes even the most stoic Roman faint for a sip of wine. In the dead of night, a fire broke out near the Circus Maximus, and as the flames leapt from building to building, the city became a blazing inferno, consuming homes, temples, and shops with a voracious appetite that even the most seasoned arsonist would envy. For 6 days and 7 nights, the fire raged, leaving 10 of Rome's 14 districts in ruins, a catastrophe that would make an insurance adjuster weep. Now, let's dive into the mythic heart of the matter, Nero fiddling while Rome burned. First, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the lyre in the emperor's hands. The story of Nero playing an instrument as the city turned to ash has the kind of cinematic flair that Hollywood dreams are made of. But there's a slight hitch. Violins didn't exist in ancient Rome. What Nero likely did was play the lyre, a stringed instrument of the time, but even this is highly debatable. Contemporary historians like Tacitus and Suetonius, who were not exactly members of the Nero fan club, suggest that the emperor was actually at his villa in Antium, some 35 miles away, when the fire started. So much for the dramatic image of Nero serenading the flames. However, in the world of politics, perception often trumps reality, and Nero's reputation as a pyromaniac was set ablaze by stories that spread faster than the fire itself. The emperor's passion for performance arts and his penchant for theatrics didn't help his case. Rumors swirled that Nero, inspired by the destruction, composed an epic poem about the fall of Troy. A bit of a PR nightmare, wouldn't you say? But before we light torches and march to crucify his character, consider this. If you were an emperor with a flair for drama, wouldn't you seize the chance for an impromptu performance? The fallout from the fire went beyond charred ruins and gossip. It was a full-blown economic and political crisis. The cost of reconstruction was staggering, running into the millions of sesterces, a sum that would make even the most lavish of emperors pause. Nero, in his infinite wisdom, seized the opportunity to rebuild Rome to his liking. Enter the Domus Aurea II. Zero. Plans for wide streets, new public buildings, and of course, another palace for himself. It was the urban planner's equivalent of a blank canvas, and Nero was painting with gold leaf. But these grand designs required funding, and this is where Nero's knack for scapegoating kicked in. In a move that would have made Machiavelli proud, Nero blamed the Christians, a relatively new and misunderstood sect in Rome, for the fire. It was a masterstroke of deflection, targeting a minority that already faced public suspicion. Christianity at the time was seen as a bizarre cult, with its followers accused of everything from cannibalism to incest. Nero's persecution of Christians wasn't just about finding a scapegoat. It was a convenient way to redirect public anger and cement his own power. The persecution began with horrific spectacles. Christians were arrested, tortured, and executed in ways that made Roman circuses look like a Sunday picnic. Some were crucified, others were dressed in animal skins and torn apart by dogs, yet others were set alight to illuminate Nero's gardens at night. All of this was a gruesome reminder of the emperor's ability to manipulate public opinion and maintain control through fear, a strategy as old as politics itself. However, Nero's attempts at damage control extended beyond mere brutality. In the aftermath of the fire, he introduced new building codes, requiring structures to be made of fireproof materials like brick instead of wood. Streets were widened, and public amenities were improved. It was a classic example of the bread and circuses approach, albeit with a dash of urban redevelopment. The emperor sought to rebuild not just the city, but his own image, one brick at a time. Yet the economic impact of the fire was devastating. The cost of reconstruction strained the empire's finances, leading to increased taxes and inflation. Nero debased the currency, reducing the silver content of the denarius to fund his projects, a move that would haunt the Roman economy for years to come. It was a stark reminder that even emperors had to balance the books, and Nero's fiscal policies were about as stable as a charioteer on a bumpy road. Politically, the fire and its aftermath revealed the cracks in Nero's rule. His relationship with the Senate continued to sour, as many senators saw the fire as a convenient excuse for Nero to expand his personal domain at the expense of the public. The tension between the emperor and the aristocracy grew, with whispers of conspiracy and plots lingering in the air like the smoke from the smoldering ruins of Rome. Despite the chaos, Nero's ability to navigate the aftermath of the fire was a testament to his political acumen. He played on the fears and prejudices of the populace, using the Christians as scapegoats while simultaneously embarking on a public works campaign to win back the city's favor. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required the finesse of a seasoned performer, a role Nero was all too eager to play. In the end, the Great Fire of Rome was both a literal and metaphorical turning point in Nero's reign. It exposed the emperor's vulnerabilities, tested his leadership, and revealed the lengths to which he would go to maintain his grip on power. The fire may have reduced Rome to ashes, but it also ignited a new phase in Nero's rule, one where the flames of ambition burned brighter than ever. As for whether Nero fiddled, played the lyre, or simply watched as Rome burned, the truth is as elusive as the smoke that once choked the city's skies. What remains is a story of survival, scapegoating, and the relentless pursuit of power, a saga that continues to captivate our imaginations, even as we sift through the ashes of history. As the Great Fire's embers cooled, Nero's rule took a detour down Paranoia Lane, a road paved with suspicion and detours towards artistic self-indulgence. Our dear emperor's later years were nothing short of a Shakespearean tragedy, with Nero cast as both the tragic hero and the comic relief. In a bid to escape the charred memories of Rome, he embarked on a series of extravagant tours across Greece around 66 AD, where he could bask in the adulation of audiences who hadn't yet heard his greatest hits, or misses, depending on your ear for music. Nero's Grecian escapades were less about governance and more about living his best rock star life, centuries before Mick Jagger ever strutted a stage. Picture this: the Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the world, participating in Greek festivals and competitions not as a patron, but as a contestant. It was as if the President of the United States decided to enter America's Got Talent, a spectacle both fascinating and oddly unsettling. Now, let's talk about Nero the performer. He wasn't just dabbling in the arts. He was diving headfirst into them like a swimmer at the Olympic Games, an event he actually participated in, winning every single competition he entered. Of course, being the emperor had its perks. Judges dared not award him anything less than first place, lest they find themselves in a Colosseum with a lion that hadn't been fed in a while. Nero would often perform for hours, delighting or tormenting audiences with his singing, lyre playing, and acting. Imagine a concert where leaving early wasn't an option unless you fancied a one-way ticket to the afterlife. The emperor's theatrical passion reached such heights that he declared himself a god of the arts, an act of hubris that would make even the most narcissistic of influencers blush. His empire-wide talent tour was funded by the Roman treasury, a fact that surely made the Senate grind their teeth into powder. But from Nero's perspective, why rule an empire if you can't indulge in a few personal whims? Right. However, Nero's artistic pursuits were not everyone's idea of cultural enrichment. Back in Rome, his absence was less a relief and more a cause for concern. The political vacuum he left behind was quickly filled with whispers of conspiracy and discontent. Senators, already disillusioned with Nero's antics, began to plot against him, their patience worn thinner than a Roman toga in a summer breeze. The emperor's love for theatrics was turning the political stage into a farce, and not everyone was laughing. The Pisonian conspiracy of 65 AD is a prime exhibit of this growing unrest. Named after Gaius Calpurnius Piso, a respected senator, the plot was an elaborate web of betrayal involving at least 41 individuals from various echelons of Roman society, including senators, equestrians, and even members of Nero's own bodyguard. Their goal: to end Nero's reign and restore some semblance of sanity to the empire. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for the conspirators. The plot was uncovered, and Nero's response was as swift as it was brutal. Executions and forced suicides aplenty, a grim reminder that while Nero might have fancied himself an artist, he was also a ruthless ruler when provoked. This conspiracy further fueled Nero's paranoia, a trait that flourished in the fertile soil of his imagination. He began to see enemies everywhere, a mindset that only intensified his erratic behavior. It's said that Nero would often wander the halls of his opulent golden house at night, haunted by visions and ghosts, both real and imagined. His increasing detachment from reality was evident to all but himself, a man who had once been the golden boy of Rome, now reduced to a paranoid recluse. Meanwhile, Nero's Greece escapades were costing the empire dearly. The lavish games, grandiose festivals, and his entourage expenses drained the Roman coffers faster than you could say sesterces. His economic policies, or lack thereof, had left the empire's finances in shambles. The silver content of coins continued to dwindle as Nero scrambled to fund his increasingly extravagant lifestyle. Inflation soared, and the common Roman citizen felt the pinch, their daily bread now costing more than a day's wage. Back in Rome, the Senate was simmering with resentment. Nero's absence meant they had more freedom, but it also left them with the unenviable task of managing the empire's day-to-day affairs without the emperor's guidance or interference, depending on how you looked at it. The lack of a clear leadership style from Nero was creating a power vacuum that rival political factions eagerly sought to fill, each with their own vision of Rome's future. Nero's return from Greece was less a triumphant homecoming and more a stormy reception. His artistic victories may have bolstered his ego, but they did little to placate a populace weary of his excesses. The once golden reputation of Nero was tarnishing rapidly, and the emperor seemed oblivious to the shifting sands beneath his feet. His penchant for theatrics had become a double-edged sword, one that threatened to cut both ways. As Nero's reign stumbled into its final act, the stage was set for more drama, intrigue, and eventual downfall. The emperor, once a promising leader, now found himself an isolated figure, trapped in a gilded cage of his own making. The mounting opposition and whispers of rebellion were growing louder, threatening to drown out the once celebrated sounds of his lyre. The tale of Nero was far from over, but the curtain was slowly, inexorably falling on an emperor who had danced too close to the flames. As the curtain prepared to fall on Nero's reign, the emperor was caught in a self-made tragedy, oblivious to the ominous murmurs of a restless Rome. By 68 AD, his erratic behavior and insatiable appetite for theatrical glory left him increasingly isolated, like a rock star whose encore went on far too long. Nero, once the golden boy with the Midas touch, was now more like King Midas himself. Everything he touched turned to gold, but there was little substance beneath the surface. The final act of his life began with a series of revolts that rippled through the empire. It started with the governor of Gaul, Gaius Julius Vindex, whose rebellion was less about personal ambition and more a desperate plea for reform. Vindex's revolt in March 68 AD was a harbinger of doom, a mere 400 miles from Rome's heart, and it resonated with others who had grown weary of Nero's follies. Enter Servius Sulpicius Galba, governor of Hispania Tarraconensis, a man who, unlike Nero, had a knack for governance over grandstanding. Galba's move to join Vindex wasn't just a military maneuver, it was a calculated political statement. As whispers of revolt spread, the Roman Senate saw an opportunity to reclaim their power. They declared Nero a public enemy and threw their lot in with Galba, turning away from an emperor who had become more caricature than ruler. Talk about a dramatic plot twist worthy of Nero's own theatrical productions. With the Senate's declaration, Nero's world unraveled faster than a toga at a bacchanalian feast. His allies abandoned him, and those who had once sung his praises now plotted his downfall. Even the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's supposed protectors, turned their backs, swayed by the promise of gold from Galba's coffers. It was a betrayal that stung deeper than any Roman dagger. Stripped of his support and staring down the barrel of rebellion, Nero fled the city, a fallen idol in search of refuge. Seeking asylum at the villa of his freedman, Phaon, Nero's fall was swift and ignoble. Here was a man who once commanded legions, now reduced to sneaking out of Rome, disguised in a shabby cloak, his imperial purple discarded like yesterday's news. As the noose tightened around his neck, both figuratively and literally, Nero's once unshakable confidence crumbled. On June 9, 68 AD, facing certain execution and humiliation, Nero chose to end his life rather than face the ignominy of capture. Assisted by his loyal secretary, Epaphroditos, Nero's last words were reported as "Qualis arifex perio," or "What an artist dies in me," a final nod to the theatrical persona he held so dear. At 30, Nero died not as an emperor, but as a tragic figure in his own melodrama. Rome, meanwhile, was left in chaos. The empire's power vacuum was a breeding ground for instability, sparking the year of the four emperors, a whirlwind of claimants to the throne, each one more ambitious than the last. Galba seized power, but his reign was short-lived, ending in assassination after just 7 months. The rapid turnover of emperors was a stark reminder of the fragility of power, a game of musical chairs where the stakes were life and death. Nero's legacy, however, was cemented in the annals of history as both a cautionary tale and a subject of endless fascination. The narrative of his rule was shaped as much by his enemies as by his own actions. Posthumous accounts painted him as the archetypal tyrant, a figure whose excesses were rivaled only by his theatrical flair. Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio are historical gossip columnists, spun tales of Nero's cruelty and debauchery, stories that captivated the Roman imagination and persisted through the ages. Yet, it's important to remember that history is often written by the victors. While Nero's reputation as a despot is well documented, his early reforms and contributions to Roman culture are frequently overshadowed by tales of madness and megalomania. His artistic endeavors, although ridiculed, pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable for a Roman ruler, challenging societal norms in ways that would resonate with future generations. Economically, Nero's reign left a mixed legacy. The debasement of currency and extravagant spending set a precedent that would haunt the Roman economy for decades. Yet, his public works and urban development projects reshaped Rome, leaving a lasting imprint on the city's architecture and infrastructure. Even his much-maligned Domus Aurea became a symbol of imperial ambition, albeit one that future emperors tried to distance themselves from. Nero's story is a testament to the complexity of power and the dual nature of legacy. He was a ruler who sought to blend art with authority, a vision that, while flawed, was undeniably ahead of its time. The allure of his narrative lies not just in his downfall, but in the human drama that unfolded, a saga of ambition, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of self-expression. As the chapters of Nero's life close, we're left pondering the eternal question of legacy. Was Nero a tyrant, a visionary, or simply a product of his environment? A man whose story was as much about the times he lived in as his own decisions. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the ashes of history, a reminder that the line between villain and victim is often as blurred as the smoke that once choked the streets of Rome. In the end, Nero's life was a spectacle, both captivating and cautionary, leaving a mark on history that refuses to fade. As we sift through the ruins of his reign, it's clear that while the flames of Nero's ambition may have flickered out, the echoes of his story continue to resonate, a testament to the enduring allure of power, art, and the human condition. In the sun-soaked city of Carthage, where the scent of the sea mingled with the cries of merchants haggling over purple dyes and exotic spices, a young boy named Hannibal Barca was about to take the first step on a path that would lead him to infamy. But before we dive into the deeds that would make him Rome's worst nightmare, let's rewind to the start, where it all began with his father, Hamilcar Barca, a man with a name that sounds like it could double as a luxury car brand, but in reality was a warlord with a grudge. Hamilcar was the kind of dad who didn't tell bedtime stories about heroes slaying dragons. Nope, he preferred recounting tales of smashing Romans, those pesky neighbors across the Mediterranean who had a habit of sticking their noses where they weren't wanted. And let's be honest, this wasn't just a friendly neighborhood squabble. Carthage and Rome were like two heavyweight boxers in an ancient arm wrestling match, each trying to outdo the other in trade, territory, and sheer arrogance. Now, Carthage was no small fry. By the time Hannibal was born in 247 BCE, this North African powerhouse was the Las Vegas of the ancient world. It was all about the bling, baby, boasting a bustling port, a booming economy, and a knack for making money that would make even the most cutthroat Wall Street broker blush. Everything from silver to saffron flowed through its docks, making it the envy of the Mediterranean. But all that glitters is not always gold, and behind the wealth was a simmering tension with Rome, who had an appetite for expansion and a penchant for war. Because who doesn't love a good conquest? Enter young Hannibal, a kid with a destiny as heavy as the family name. The Barca clan didn't do things by halves, and Hamilcar had big plans for his son. Legend has it that, at the tender age of 9, Hannibal was brought to a sacrificial altar, because you know normal childhood stuff, and made to swear an oath of everlasting hatred against Rome. Talk about setting the bar high for familial expectations. Son, forget about being a doctor or a lawyer. Go out there, and just bring an empire to its knees. The socio-economic landscape of Carthage at the time was a complex tapestry of trade, politics, and cultural exchange. The city was a magnet for merchants and mercenaries alike, a place where the ebb and flow of wealth dictated the rhythm of life. But beneath this bustling exterior lay the stark reality of Carthage's rivalry with Rome, a rivalry that would shape Hannibal's entire existence. Carthage had learned the hard way from the First Punic War that Rome was not just a contender, but a relentless adversary. The war had cost Carthage not only Sicily, but also a hefty indemnity of 200 talents, about 80,000 pounds of silver, which even by today's standards is enough to make any treasurer weep. With Carthage licking its wounds and Rome basking in its victory, the stage was set for round 2. Hamilcar, never one to sit back and let bygones be bygones, was determined to rebuild Carthage's strength. And what better way to do that than by training his offspring to be a military prodigy? Hannibal's early exposure to military life was like a boot camp for future conquerors. Picture this. Instead of soccer practice, his afternoons were filled with strategy sessions and cavalry drills. If there was a badge for most likely to invade Italy, Hannibal would have won it hands down. Now, let's pause here for a moment and consider the absurdity. A 9-year-old taking an oath of eternal enmity against a city-state he probably couldn't even point to on a map. But such was the world of the Berserkers, where family feuds were epic and vendettas were as binding as blood. This wasn't just about personal grudges. It was about survival in a cutthroat world where power was the currency of the day. Hannibal's education wasn't just limited to swords and shields, though. Carthage was a cosmopolitan hub, and young Hannibal was exposed to a melting pot of cultures, languages, and ideas. This diversity would serve him well in his later campaigns, where understanding the nuances of different peoples and places became as crucial as his tactical genius. He was like the James Bond of the ancient world, charming, multilingual, and deadly. But back to the oath. It's easy to romanticize this moment as the birth of a legend, the flicker of a flame that would blaze across the ancient world. Yet the reality was more grounded. Carthage's need for revenge was not just personal, but pragmatic. Rome's expansion threatened Carthaginian trade routes and influence, and Hamilcar was determined to ensure his son understood the stakes. War was coming, and Hannibal was being groomed to be its harbinger. As Hannibal grew older, he was thrust into the whirlwind of Carthaginian politics and military ambition. His father's campaigns in Iberia, modern-day Spain and Portugal, were as much about securing resources and strategic footholds as they were about preparing for the inevitable clash with Rome. Hannibal learned the art of war not from dusty scrolls, but from the battlefield, absorbing the lessons of leadership, courage, and perhaps most importantly, the value of patience. Because while Rome might have been the immediate target, the world was watching, and Hannibal knew that to defeat an empire, you needed more than just skill. You needed strategy, cunning, and a bit of that Barca flair. So there you have it, the foundations of one of history's most infamous military careers laid bare. Hannibal's early life was a concoction of familial duty, cultural exposure, and a hefty dose of Carthaginian ambition. In a world where oaths were sacred and grudges could last generations, Hannibal's path was set. And as we'll see in the next parts of his story, that path would lead him over mountains, through battles, and into the annals of history as a man who dared to take on Rome itself. But remember, this wasn't just about one boy's vendetta. It was about a city's fight for survival, a father's legacy, and the eternal struggle for power in a world where the stakes were as high as the peaks of the Alps Hannibal would one day cross. Stay tuned, because the best, or worst, depending on if you were Roman, is yet to come. The stakes were indeed as high as the peaks of the Alps, which Hannibal would famously cross in 218 BC. Now, strap in, because this wasn't your average scenic mountain hike. This was a logistical nightmare of epic proportions, a military maneuver that would make modern supply chain managers break out in a cold sweat. Picture this. Hannibal, with his army of around 50,000 men, 9 000 cavalry, and the piece de resistance, 37 elephants, faced the daunting task of traversing one of the most formidable natural barriers in Europe. First off, let's address the elephants in the room, literally. These weren't the majestic, battle-ready behemoths you might imagine thundering across the mountains like some ancient tank division. No, the reality was far grimmer. These elephants, imported from North Africa, were more akin to stressed-out divas than war machines. The journey was brutal, the terrain unforgiving. The Alps weren't just the metaphorical obstacle between Hannibal and Rome. They were an icy, rock-strewn gauntlet of death. The elephants, unused to the cold and treacherous paths, struggled immensely. Out of the original 37, only a handful survived the crossing. Talk about a high attrition rate. The myth of the glorious elephant march has persisted through the ages, but the truth is, these animals were more burden than boon. Their upkeep was an economic sinkhole, requiring massive amounts of food and care. Imagine the logistics of feeding thousands of soldiers and animals while scaling mountains. It was a supply chain disaster waiting to happen, and happen it did. By the time Hannibal descended into Italy, his forces were considerably depleted, not just in numbers, but in morale. Now, let's talk economics, because nothing fuels a war machine quite like cold, hard cash. Transporting an army across the Alps was a costly affair. Hannibal's campaign was bankrolled by the rich resources and wealth of Iberia, which Carthage had been exploiting for years. But even with a treasure trove at his disposal, the financial strain was enormous. The journey through the Alps was a money pit, draining resources faster than a shopaholic in a luxury mall. And it wasn't just the immediate costs. There was also the long-term economic impact to consider. Every soldier lost, every elephant that didn't make it, represented a significant financial hit. And let's not forget the human factor. Hannibal's army didn't just face the natural challenges of the Alps. They had to deal with the hostile tribes that called the mountains home. The local Gallic tribes were none too pleased about an army marching through their backyard. Skirmishes were frequent, adding another layer of complexity to an already Herculean task. It was like trying to thread a needle while dodging punches. But why, you might ask, would anyone attempt such a suicidal endeavor? Well, Hannibal wasn't just any commander. He was a master of psychological warfare, and crossing the Alps was as much about strategy as it was about spectacle. It sent a clear message to Rome. I'm coming, and I'm willing to go through hell to get to you. The audacity of the move was meant to unsettle the Romans, to shake their confidence, and show them that no terrain, no matter how daunting, could stop the Barca war machine. In modern terms, think of it like a daring corporate takeover, where one company goes to extreme lengths to outmaneuver and outsmart its rival. The Alps were Hannibal's boardroom, and his army, his shareholders. Every mountain pass conquered was a statement of intent, a promise of impending conquest. Hannibal was betting the farm, and the elephants, on this gamble, knowing full well that failure was not an option. The crossing of the Alps has been romanticized over the centuries, often portrayed as a testament to human will and ingenuity. And while there's no denying the sheer guts it took, the reality was messier, more desperate. It's easy to lose sight of the blood, sweat, and tears when history is draped in the rosy glow of legend. But at its core, this was a grueling test of endurance, a battle against nature itself, where every step forward came at a steep cost. So, as Hannibal and his weary remnants finally set foot in the fertile plains of Italy, they carried with them not just the scars of a treacherous journey, but the weight of a monumental accomplishment. They had done the unthinkable, and in doing so, had set the stage for one of the most legendary confrontations in history. But remember, the Alps were just the beginning. Hannibal's war with Rome was far from over, and as we'll see, the real battles were yet to come. Stay tuned, because the saga of Hannibal Barca is only just warming up, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. When Hannibal and his battle-worn troops finally emerged from the Alps, they stepped onto the fertile and fateful plains of Italy, ready to tango with the Romans. And what a dance it was about to be. If you think the Alps crossing was a logistical nightmare, wait until you hear about what came next. Hannibal wasn't just here to play nice. He was here to rewrite the rulebook on ancient warfare, starting with a series of tactical masterclasses that would leave even the most seasoned Roman generals scratching their heads. First up in Hannibal's hit parade was the Battle of the Trebia in 218 BC. Now, picture this. Hannibal, fresh from his mountain escapade, was up against Tiberius Sempronius Longus, a Roman consul with a name as long as his list of mistakes. Sempronius was eager for glory, but Hannibal had other plans. His army, though reduced, was still a force to be reckoned with, and he had a little trick up his sleeve, namely, a knack for psychological warfare. Hannibal lured the Romans into a trap by staging a retreat and then ambushing them while they were still figuring out which end of their spears to point forward. Result: a crushing Carthaginian victory. Hannibal had just served Rome its first taste of his strategic genius, and it was bitter indeed. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Hannibal's victories weren't just about clever tactics. They were also about exploiting every Roman blunder. And boy, did Rome provide. Fast forward to 217 BC and the Battle of Lake Trasimene. Here, Hannibal pulled off what can only be described as a magician's disappearing act. Only instead of rabbits, it was an entire Roman army. By cunningly using the terrain, he managed to ambush the Romans on the shores of the lake, enveloping them in a fog of confusion and Carthaginian spears. It was a bloodbath, with around 15,000 Roman soldiers never making it home for dinner. Talk about a wake-up call. Now, by this point, you might think the Romans would start catching on to Hannibal's tricks. But no, their response was a collective shrug and a resolve to carry on as if nothing had happened. Enter the Fabian strategy, named after Quintus Fabius Maximus, a Roman general who decided that maybe not running headlong into Hannibal's pointed sticks was a good idea. Fabius opted for a war of attrition, shadowing Hannibal's movements and avoiding direct confrontation. It was the ancient equivalent of giving someone the silent treatment, and it worked, sort of. While it slowed Hannibal down, it didn't stop him, and it certainly didn't quench the Roman thirst for a decisive victory, which brings us to the piece de resistance, the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. If there's one battle that cements Hannibal's reputation as a tactical genius, it's this one. Facing a Roman force that outnumbered his own by more than 2-1, Hannibal decided to rewrite the art of war. The Romans, confident in their numerical superiority, marched in like lions ready for the slaughter. What they didn't realize was that they were the ones being led to the abattoir. Hannibal's strategy at Cannae was nothing short of diabolical brilliance. He arranged his troops in a crescent formation, deliberately placing his weakest units in the center. As the Romans advanced, Hannibal's center gradually gave way, creating the illusion of a rout. The Romans, intoxicated by what they thought was a certain victory, charged in, only to find themselves enveloped by Carthaginian forces on all sides. It was a classic pincer movement, and the Roman army was squeezed like a tube of ancient toothpaste. The result? A staggering Roman loss, with estimates suggesting over 50,000 Roman soldiers were killed that day. Cannae wasn't just a battle. It was a masterclass in military strategy that will be studied for centuries. But let's pause to debunk some of the myths surrounding Cannae. The romanticized narrative paints Hannibal as an infallible commander, but the truth is murkier. The victory, while spectacular, was also a testament to Roman overconfidence and a series of tactical blunders. The Romans, driven by hubris, walked into the trap with their eyes wide shut. And while Hannibal's victory was complete, it wasn't without cost. His forces were exhausted, and despite the triumph, he lacked the resources to capitalize on the win by marching on Rome itself. In the aftermath of Cannae, the psychological impact on Rome was profound. The city was in shock, its citizens grappling with the realization that their invincible legions were anything. But yet, the Romans, being Romans, refused to throw in the towel. Instead, they doubled down, raising new armies and adopting Fabius's strategy of attrition, hoping to wear Hannibal down through sheer persistence. It was a classic case of, if at first you don't succeed, try again, even if the trying involved a lot more dying. Economically, the war was draining both sides. Carthage, despite its initial riches, was feeling the pinch. War was an expensive business, and the cost of maintaining Hannibal's army in foreign territory was mounting. Meanwhile, Rome, with its vast resources, could replace its losses with alarming speed. It was a battle of endurance, a test of who could hold out the longest in a war that showed no signs of abating. As Hannibal's campaigns continued, the legend of his tactical genius grew, but so did the realization that a decisive victory over Rome was elusive. The battles were brutal, the strategies brilliant, but the war was far from over. Hannibal had shaken the Roman world to its core, but the giant wasn't dead, just roused to a furious, relentless fight back. The stage was set for a protracted conflict that would see fortunes rise and fall, alliances forged and broken, and the fate of empires hanging in the balance. In the grand tapestry of history, Hannibal's campaign in Italy was a thread woven with ambition, brilliance, and the harsh realities of war. The romantic allure of his victories can't obscure the grim aftermath of battlefields strewn with the detritus of broken lives and shattered dreams. Yet, in this crucible of conflict, Hannibal's legacy was forged, a legacy that would echo through the ages, inspiring generals and storytellers alike. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this saga, where we'll delve into the continuing struggle, the shifting tides of fortune, and the inexorable march of history. Because in the world of Hannibal Barca, the only certainty was uncertainty, and the only constant was change. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot, and the tale of one of history's most audacious commanders was far from finished. As Hannibal's saga unfolded on the sun-drenched fields of ancient Italy, the real battle was brewing not in the open plains, but behind closed doors. The Carthaginian hero was a master on the battlefield, but back home, he faced an altogether different kind of war, a political one. You see, while Hannibal was busy teaching the Romans the art of the unexpected, Carthage's political elite was having its own kind of Roman holiday, complete with dithering and indecision. It's like while Hannibal was out doing a military version of Cirque du Soleil, his supposed supporters were more interested in debating whether to order pizza or sushi for dinner. Let's break it down. Despite Hannibal's jaw-dropping victories, he wasn't exactly swimming in support from his home turf. The Carthaginian Senate seemed to have a serious case of commitment issues, and their reluctance to send reinforcements was less about strategy and more about political squabbling. Imagine being a rock star selling out stadiums, only to find your record label can't decide whether to release your album. The folks back in Carthage were torn between supporting Hannibal's audacious campaign and safeguarding their own interests. After all, funding a prolonged war isn't as glamorous as it sounds. It's more like watching your bank account drain while you hope the stock market rebounds. And speaking of finances, let's talk about the economic toll these campaigns were taking on Carthage. War, as it turns out, is a pricey affair. Remember the riches Hannibal had supposedly brought with him from Iberia? Well, they were starting to look more like monopoly money as the costs of maintaining an army on foreign soil piled up. Carthage might have been the ancient Las Vegas, but even the shiniest facade can hide a crumbling foundation. The city's economy was buckling under the pressure, with trade routes disrupted and resources stretched thin. Hannibal's victories, while spectacular, were emptying the coffers faster than a night at the casino. Now, you might be asking, why didn't Carthage just dig deeper into its pockets? Great question, and here's where things get juicy. The Carthaginian leadership was anything but unified. Factionalism was rife, with various political and economic interests vying for supremacy. Some saw Hannibal's campaign as a risky venture that could backfire spectacularly, while others were wary of his growing power and popularity. It was a classic case of too many cooks in the kitchen, where everyone had a different recipe for success, and none were willing to agree on a single dish. In essence, Hannibal was the man with the plan, but Carthage was the committee that couldn't decide on the font for the cover letter. With Carthage support teetering between lukewarm and outright chilly, Hannibal had to rely on more than just military prowess. Enter diplomacy, or at least his attempt at it. Hannibal knew he needed allies to bolster his forces, and he set his sights on the various Italian states that had their own beefs with Rome. But here's the kicker. Convincing them to join his cause was like trying to sell sunscreen to a penguin. The allure of Hannibal's victories was undeniable, sure, but these states were understandably hesitant. Aligning with Hannibal meant betting against Rome, a prospect that was as tempting as playing chicken with a speeding chariot. Despite these challenges, Hannibal managed to secure some alliances, albeit tenuous ones. The Capuans and a few other cities decided to roll the dice, seeing in Hannibal a chance to break free from Roman dominance. But let's not kid ourselves. These alliances were often more marriages of convenience than love matches, and their loyalty was shakier than a house of cards in a windstorm. The support Hannibal craved was always just out of reach, a tantalizing mirage in the political desert of the Italian peninsula. And while Hannibal was juggling the delicate act of war and diplomacy, the Romans were busy adapting to his tactics. They were like an ancient version of a tech startup, constantly pivoting and iterating. After the disaster at Cannae, Rome learned a thing or two about underestimating the Carthaginian commander. They realized that head-on confrontations were not their forte, so they switched gears, opting for a strategy of attrition. Rome's new approach was less about flashy battles and more about grinding down Hannibal's forces through guerrilla tactics and scorched earth policies. It was a war of patience, where the aim was to outlast rather than outgun. Hannibal, for all his brilliance, found himself increasingly hamstrung by Rome's new strategy. His once-daring maneuvers were now met with caution and calculated resistance. The Romans were effectively playing the long game, banking on their superior resources and manpower to tip the scales in their favor. It was a game of chess on a grand scale, with Hannibal's knights and bishops facing off against Rome's relentless pawns. But let's not sugarcoat it. Hannibal's situation was becoming desperate. His army, worn down by years of campaigning and dwindling supplies, was like a smartphone with 5% battery and no charger in sight. Reinforcements from Carthage remained a distant dream. His allies were proving less reliable than a paper umbrella in a thunderstorm. Yet, in the face of mounting adversity, Hannibal's resolve was unshaken. He continued to strategize, adapt, and fight on, driven by the same indomitable spirit that had brought him to Italy's doorstep. In this cauldron of conflict, the legend of Hannibal Barca continued to grow, but so did the stark reality of his predicament. The political landscape was as treacherous as any battlefield, and the economic pressures were unrelenting. Hannibal's campaign, once a beacon of Carthaginian ambition, was now a test of endurance, a battle against time, resources, and the shifting sands of political fortune. So, as we leave Hannibal in this moment of uncertainty, it's clear that the story is far from over. The saga of Hannibal Barca is one of triumph and tribulation, genius and grit, a testament to the complexity of war and the resilience of the human spirit. The stakes remain high, the challenges daunting, and the outcome uncertain. But one thing is for sure, Hannibal's journey is a tale for the ages, a story that continues to captivate and inspire, reminding us that history is as much about the battles we fight as the politics we navigate. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll dive deeper into Hannibal's enduring struggle, the shifting tides of war, and the fateful decisions that would shape the destiny of empires. Because in the annals of history, the road to victory is never a straight line, and the tale of Hannibal Barca is a winding path that promises more twists, turns, and revelations yet to come. As we dive back into the tapestry of Hannibal's life, it's clear that while the man was a maestro on the battlefield, his symphony hit a sour note when it came to the political arena. After years of playing cat and mouse with Rome, Hannibal's campaign in Italy began to unravel like a threadbare cloak. Rome, with its dogged persistence and deep pockets, gradually turned the tide. The final straw came in 203 BCE, when Hannibal was recalled to Carthage to face an invasion led by Scipio Africanus, the Roman general who had taken the fight to Carthage's doorstep. The stage was set for a climactic showdown at the Battle of Zama. Let's set the scene. In 202 BCE, Scipio and Hannibal faced off in the North African sands, each a veteran of war, each carrying the weight of their respective nations' hopes. The battle that ensued was a chess match of epic proportions, a clash that would decide the fate of empires. Hannibal, with his characteristic flair, deployed his remaining war elephants, hoping to replicate his earlier successes. But Scipio had done his homework. He devised tactics to neutralize the elephant charge, turning Hannibal's trump card into a liability. The result was a decisive Roman victory, sealing Carthage's fate and ending Hannibal's run as the boogeyman of Rome. With Carthage defeated, Hannibal's next chapter was less about swords and more about survival. He slipped into exile, a man without a country, pursued by Roman agents like a fugitive in an ancient spy thriller. His travels took him to the courts of various Hellenistic kings, offering his military expertise as a consultant of sorts. It was a far cry from leading armies across the Alps, but Hannibal remained a sought-after figure, his reputation as a military genius unblemished by defeat. In exile, Hannibal didn't just twiddle his thumbs. Oh no, he had plans. Despite being miles away, he attempted to reform Carthage's political system. He proposed changes to curb the corruption that had plagued Carthage's oligarchy, an irony not lost on historians, considering how his military exploits had drained Carthage's coffers. His reforms included altering the council's structure to balance power more evenly, a move that was as popular as a rainstorm at a picnic among the Carthaginian elite. Yet, his efforts left a lasting imprint on Carthage, showing that Hannibal's mind was as sharp in governance as it was on the battlefield. But let's not sugarcoat it. Hannibal's political ambitions were met with resistance. The elites, wary of his growing influence, turned on him, much like a pack of hyenas sensing weakness. They accused him of conspiring with old enemies, which, in the cutthroat world of ancient politics, was as good as signing his own death warrant. Facing renewed pressure, Hannibal fled Carthage yet again, becoming a wanderer in the twilight of his life. Hannibal's final years were spent in the court of King Prusias of Bithynia, a small kingdom on the fringes of the Roman world. Even in his reduced circumstances, Hannibal remained a thorn in Rome's side, advising Prusias in his conflicts against Rome's allies. But Hannibal's presence was too potent a symbol to be ignored. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, demanded his extradition. Cornered and with few options left, Hannibal chose to end his life on his terms, reportedly taking poison around 183 BCE, a final act of defiance from a man who had spent his life defying the odds. Now, let's pause for a moment to unravel the myth from the man. Hannibal's legacy is a patchwork quilt of triumphs and tragedies, a testament to the duality of genius. On the one hand, he was a brilliant tactician, a commander whose strategies would be dissected and emulated for centuries. The Battle of Cannae remains a staple in military academies worldwide, a masterclass in encirclement that has inspired generals from Napoleon to von Schlieffen. On the other hand, Hannibal's relentless pursuit of Rome left Carthage economically crippled and politically fractured, sowing the seeds for its eventual downfall. Yet, the allure of Hannibal endures. He is romanticized as the quintessential underdog, the maverick who dared to challenge the might of Rome. His audacity and vision are celebrated, but the harsh reality is that his victories were piddling at best. Carthage, once the jewel of the Mediterranean, was left weakened, a shadow of its former self. The Punic Wars drained its resources, and its eventual destruction by Rome in 146 BCE was a coda that Hannibal's own actions helped compose. The enduring fascination with Hannibal speaks to the human affinity for tales of audacity and ambition. We are drawn to figures who challenge the status quo, who dare to dream beyond the confines of possibility. Hannibal, with his elephants and his Alps, embodies the spirit of adventure and the allure of the improbable. Yet, his story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that while legend may gild the past with glory, history reveals the cost of such grandeur. In the grand ledger of history, Hannibal's exploits are a balancing act of brilliance and consequence. He reshaped military strategy, leaving an indelible mark on the art of war. His life is a study in contrasts, a blend of heroism and hubris, a narrative as compelling as it is complex. The legacy of Hannibal Barca is not just in the battles he fought, but in the lessons he left behind about power, ambition, and the relentless march of history. As we close the chapter on Hannibal, we are left with the realization that history is not just about the past, but about the stories we tell and the truths we uncover. Hannibal's life is a tapestry woven with the threads of human endeavor, a reminder that while we may seek to conquer, the real victory lies in understanding the world we strive to change. And so, with a nod to the past and an eye on the future, we bid farewell to Hannibal Barca, a man whose legend will forever echo in the annals of history.